Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. I had been on the road for days, stopping at motels and hotels along the way. When I finally reached this small, quiet hotel on the outskirts of town, I was relieved to settle in for a night of rest. The room was modest, with faded wallpaper and an old wooden dresser, but it was clean enough. After unpacking, I took a long shower and flopped onto the bed, eager to unwind. I was almost asleep when I heard it. A soft scratching noise coming from the door. It was faint at first, like something small was trying to get in, but it grew louder with each passing second. My heart rate picked up, and I lay perfectly still, listening closely. I hesitated before getting up. The scratching stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence hanging in the air. I slowly made my way to the door, feeling an inexplicable pull to check, even though every instinct screamed at me to ignore it. I pressed my eye to the peephole, hoping to see a maintenance worker or someone else, but there was nothing. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Still no one. The hallway outside was empty, bathed in the dim yellow light of the overhead bulb. I felt a strange sense of unease settle in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't explain it, but something felt off. I stepped back from the door, trying to shake off the feeling that had crept into my bones. I looked around the room as if the walls themselves could offer an explanation, but everything seemed normal. The hotel was quiet, almost too quiet. I checked the window, it was closed and locked. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the mind, and went back to the bed. But no sooner had I pulled the covers over me than the scratching started again. It was louder this time, more deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. My breath caught in my throat, and I found myself frozen in place. There was no mistaking it now. Someone, or something, was outside my door. My hand reached for my phone, but I stopped myself. Who would I call? The hotel staff? What would I even say? There's something scratching at my door. The scratching continued, more persistent than before. I couldn't ignore it any longer. With trembling hands, I stood up, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe someone was playing a prank on me. Maybe it was just a stray animal, although I couldn't imagine one being able to make such a noise. I grabbed a nearby chair and propped it against the door handle, just in case. I took a deep breath and looked through the peephole again. The hallway was still empty, but this time I saw something different. At the very edge of my vision, there was a shadow. I couldn't make out any details, but the shape was unmistakable, a person, or at least a figure of some kind. They were standing there, motionless, just out of view. I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me, and my body reacted before I could think. I pulled away from the door, my mind swirling with dread. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. It wasn't coming from the bottom of the door anymore, but from higher up, almost like something or someone was trying to claw their way in. I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding, eyes darting between the door and the shadow in the hallway. I was starting to panic now. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to do something, but I couldn't move. What if it wasn't just a person? What if there was something else outside that door? Something I didn't want to encounter? The scratching stopped abruptly. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything to break the silence. The stillness stretched on, making the air thick and oppressive. And then, just as I thought I might be able to breathe again, I heard a voice. A low, raspy whisper from the other side of the door. "Let me in." I froze. The voice was so faint, barely a murmur, but it was unmistakable. My stomach turned, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I could no longer deny that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't an animal. I backed away from the door, stumbling over the edge of the bed. I didn't know what to do. Should I open the door? Should I call the police? Should I just leave the room and run? The whisper came again, this time louder. "Let me in." It sounded like it was right there, just inches away from the door, but still, no one was visible through the peephole. I looked again, but the hallway remained empty. My mind raced, and I fought to control my panic. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't wait for whatever was outside to make its next move. I reached for my phone again, but my hand trembled too much to dial properly. The door handle jiggled. I gasped and stumbled back, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The handle twisted slowly, as if someone on the other side was testing it, but the door remained locked. I held my breath, waiting for the next sound. It came. A soft, wet thud against the door, followed by the unmistakable sound of something dragging across the wood slowly, deliberately. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. There was no way I could stay in this room. I rushed to the window, throwing it open with a desperate force. The cool night air hit me, but I barely registered it. I climbed out, my body shaking uncontrollably as I scrambled down the fire escape. My heart still raced, and my mind screamed at me to keep going, to get as far away from the hotel as possible. When I finally reached the ground, I didn't stop to look back. I ran, my legs burning, my breath ragged. I didn't care where I was going, just as long as it was away from that hotel. The next morning, I returned to the hotel to check out. I didn't mention what happened to anyone. What was the point? But as I passed the front desk, I noticed something strange. The clerk was absent-mindedly scratching at her neck, and I couldn't help but notice the faint marks on her skin, like something had been clawing at her. I shuddered, turned, and walked out. I didn't look back. Story 2. I got into my car after grocery shopping and noticed a piece of paper under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was just a parking ticket or some kind of flyer, but there was no writing on the outside, just the stark white of the paper against the dark windshield. My fingers hesitated on the steering wheel as I glanced around the empty parking lot. Curiosity and unease swirled in my stomach as I opened the door and stepped out, glancing over my shoulder. The lot was mostly empty, save for a few parked cars scattered near the entrances. I walked over to my car's front, bending down to remove the paper from the wiper. As my fingers brushed the edges, a van pulled up behind me. The van wasn't anything special, just a plain white one with tinted windows. The engine hummed softly, but there was something about the way it parked so close to my car that made my skin crawl. I couldn't see the driver through the darkened windows, but I felt a strange pressure in the air, like the vehicle was waiting for something. My heart began to beat faster as I quickly straightened up, holding the paper in my hand. I froze for a moment, unsure whether to get back into my car or walk away. The van's engine idled, its headlights shining brightly in the dimming parking lot. I turned my head to glance down the row of cars, looking for someone who might be getting into their vehicle, but there was no one. I was alone in the lot, and the van seemed oddly out of place. The van's engine shut off, and I could feel my breath quickening. I made a split-second decision to get back into my car. As I slid into the driver's seat, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. I looked up and saw the van's side door open. A man in a dark hoodie stepped out, walking toward me at a steady pace. My pulse quickened as I slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. The man didn't seem to hurry, but there was something deliberate about the way he moved. My fingers fumbled with the keys in the ignition, trying to start the engine. As I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw that the van had moved forward slightly, its headlights still aimed at my car. I tried to keep calm, telling myself there was nothing to worry about. Maybe he was just a guy looking for directions, I thought. But deep down, something told me this was not a casual encounter. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The man stopped a few feet from my car and stood still for a moment, his eyes locked onto mine through the windshield. I didn't know how long we stared at each other, but it felt like an eternity. His face was obscured by the hoodie, but I could see his posture, his arms at his sides, his feet planted firmly on the pavement. I knew then that something was wrong. The air seemed heavier, the space between us closing in despite the distance. I decided to act quickly. I slammed the car into reverse, jerking the wheel to avoid hitting the van. As I backed up, I checked my mirrors, my heart racing. The man didn't move, just stood there, watching, like he was waiting for me to make my move. The van, which had been a few feet behind me, was now in my rearview mirror, but I couldn't tell if anyone was inside. With my hands trembling, I drove forward, peeling out of the parking lot and onto the street. I didn't look back. My focus was entirely on the road ahead as I accelerated, the tires screeching slightly in the silence of the evening. I turned down a few side streets, just to make sure I wasn't being followed. The streets were empty, the soft hum of the car, the only sound. But the feeling of being watched never left. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the image of that man, standing still in the middle of the parking lot, his eyes locked onto mine. Who was he? Why had he gotten out of the van? And why did it feel like he was waiting for something? I drove for what felt like an hour, taking every turn carefully, trying to stay alert. I wanted to go home, but I didn't want to take the same route I normally did. Every car on the road seemed like a potential threat, every turn a chance to be followed. My breath came in shallow bursts, my mind overwhelmed with the need to find a place to pull over and just breathe for a moment. Eventually, I reached a small convenience store on the corner of a quiet street. I parked, locking the doors behind me, and sat in silence for a moment. My hands were shaking, my stomach twisted in knots. I looked around the parking lot, but there was no sign of the van. Maybe it was just my imagination, I thought. Maybe it was nothing. I stayed parked for a while, just trying to calm down. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from a friend, asking how my day had been. I didn't know why, but I decided to tell her what had happened. She replied almost instantly, telling me that it sounded creepy and that I should report it to the police. I hadn't thought about that. Maybe I should have. After another few minutes, I decided to head home, taking a much longer route this time. I kept checking my mirrors, but I didn't see the van. The rest of the drive was uneventful, though I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I felt a brief wave of relief, but it didn't last. I stepped out of my car, my heart still racing, and I looked around the street. The world seemed quiet, peaceful, but the moment I closed the door to my house, I knew that something had shifted. The fear had settled in deep, and I couldn't shake it. The paper under the windshield wiper, the van, the man, it all felt too deliberate. That night, I locked every door, checked every window, and stayed alert. Even as I fell into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. The whole situation had been strange, but now it felt like a warning. Something told me that I hadn't seen the last of that van, or the man in the hoodie. Story 3. The cool morning air filled my lungs as I jogged through the empty streets, the rhythmic sound of my sneakers hitting the pavement in sync with my heartbeat. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the town. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of morning that made it easy to clear my mind. I'd been jogging this route for weeks, enjoying the solitude and the calm before the world woke up. As I turned onto a quieter trail near the edge of town, I noticed something in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving at the edge of the woods. I didn't pay much attention at first, assuming it was just a squirrel or some early morning hiker. But then, as I rounded the bend, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me, echoing off the quiet trail. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone just getting started on their run. Instead, I saw a man tall and unremarkable, wearing a plain gray sweatshirt and running shoes. He was keeping pace with me, moving at the same speed, matching every stride as if he had been running right behind me for miles. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickened my pace, hoping to distance myself. But the man did the same. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was no way he had been behind me from the start. The trail was empty when I had begun my jog, and there was no sign of anyone coming from behind. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, that he was simply out for a run like I was. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something felt off. There was no friendly greeting or casual acknowledgement, just the steady rhythm of his footsteps behind me. He wasn't speeding up or slowing down, just maintaining that unnerving distance. I took a sharp turn, hoping to lose him, but when I looked back, he was still there, effortlessly keeping up. My breath started to quicken, a knot forming in my stomach. I wasn't a fast runner, but I knew this trail well. I had pushed myself harder before, but no matter what I did, the man stayed right on my heels. I picked up the pace even more, my muscles burning, my breath ragged. The woods around me seemed to close in, the trees stretching their branches like arms, and the path ahead seemed darker, narrower. But still, the man was there, like a shadow, never speaking, never making a sound other than the soft thud of his footsteps against the dirt. I made another turn, this time veering off the main trail and onto a smaller path that looped back toward town. If I could just make it back to a more populated area, I'd be safe. But when I glanced back again, the man was still there, just a few feet behind me. His expression was unreadable, his face partially obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a sprint, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps never faltering, never gaining or losing ground. I was terrified now, not just of being followed, but of the eerie way he seemed so calm, like he wasn't even trying. My breath came in gasps, my legs aching with the effort, but the man's presence never wavered. It felt as if the trail had become an endless loop, the same trees and bushes blurring together as I ran, unable to shake him. The only thing that was constant was his proximity, always right there, never further, never closer. I reached a clearing ahead where the trail opened up to a small park. The sound of my pounding feet was the only noise in the stillness, and I forced myself to slow, my chest tightening with exhaustion and fear. If I could just get to the park benches, maybe someone would be there. But as I glanced over my shoulder, the man was right behind me, his face still unreadable. I stopped abruptly, turning to face him, my heart thundering in my chest. For a moment, neither of us moved, standing in the clearing like two figures in a standoff. His eyes met mine, and I could feel a chill run down my spine, but he said nothing. He didn't even seem out of breath, his posture relaxed as if we had been jogging together this whole time. "What do you want?" I managed to force the words out, my voice trembling despite myself. He didn't answer. He simply took a step forward, his movements smooth and deliberate. I took a step back, my mind racing for an escape plan. My phone was in my pocket, but I hadn't had the chance to stop and call for help. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, like he was waiting for something. Suddenly, a car passed on the main road up ahead, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran toward it, yelling for help, my legs aching with every step. The man didn't follow immediately, but instead paused for a second, watching me. I didn't look back as I sprinted toward the road, my heart pounding so loudly in my ears I could barely hear the car's engine approaching. I waved my arms, desperate for attention. The car slowed, then came to a stop beside me. The driver rolled down their window, a middle-aged woman with a concerned look on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes scanning the empty path behind me. "Please, just take me home," I gasped, hardly able to catch my breath. I didn't dare look behind me again. The woman didn't hesitate, unlocking the door and allowing me to climb in. As she pulled away, I glanced over my shoulder once more. The man was standing at the edge of the woods, still watching. His figure slowly faded into the shadows as the car sped away. I never ran that trail again. The memory of his footsteps, so perfectly in sync with mine, haunted me long after I had returned home. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been there all along, waiting for me to notice. Story 4. I was at the laundromat, flipping through a magazine while waiting for my laundry to finish. The familiar hum of the machines and the soft thuds of clothes tumbling inside were the only sounds in the dimly lit room. I liked coming here on Thursdays. It was usually quiet, with only a few other people milling about. I could always get my laundry done quickly and have a few minutes to myself. I was just about to turn a page when I felt a presence next to me. I glanced up, surprised to see a man sitting on the bench beside me. He was tall, with a thin face and messy dark hair. His clothes were unremarkable, just a gray jacket and worn jeans. He smiled politely, but there was something unsettling in his eyes. "You always do your laundry on Thursdays, don't you?" he asked, his voice low but clear. I froze, caught off guard by the question. I had never seen this man before, and yet his observation felt far too specific to be a coincidence. My mind raced as I tried to understand what he meant. Yeah, I replied cautiously, unsure of what to say. "I usually come on Thursdays." I glanced at the rows of washers, hoping he wouldn't say anything else. But instead of looking away, he leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing in an almost knowing way. "Thursdays are your favorite days, aren't they?" he continued, his voice almost too calm. There was something about the way he spoke that made my skin crawl. It was like he knew me, really knew me, but I couldn't place how. I suddenly felt self-conscious, wondering if I had somehow given him a reason to approach me. I nodded, feeling my heart rate pick up. "Yeah, I like the routine. It's quiet." I looked around the laundromat, hoping someone else might notice the conversation and step in. But no one seemed to be paying attention. The other patrons were absorbed in their own tasks, lost in the monotony of folding clothes or staring blankly at their laundry tumbling in the machines. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the floor for a moment, as though lost in thought. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, wondering if I should get up and leave. But something about him made me hesitate. He wasn't aggressive, but there was an intensity to him that made my unease grow with every passing second. "You're always here at the same time, too," he said after a long pause, his voice flat. I frowned, trying to hide my surprise. He was right. I always came around the same hour, but I didn't think anyone had ever noticed. It was just part of my routine, something I didn't think anyone else paid attention to. How do you know that? I asked before I could stop myself. His lips curled into a smile again, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He didn't seem startled by the question at all. "I've been watching you," he said simply, his tone matter of fact, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. The words hit me like a cold slap, and I suddenly felt trapped. My mind raced to make sense of what was happening. Was he following me? Had I seen him around before? Before I could say anything, he continued, his gaze now fixed on the washing machines. "You don't like to be bothered when you're here, do you?" His question was soft, almost too soft, like he was trying to figure me out. "You come here to be alone, to think." I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me. It was true that I valued the quiet when I came to the laundromat, but it wasn't something I had shared with anyone. How could this stranger know that? Was he just guessing? "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, standing up a little too quickly. My voice trembled slightly, betraying the unease I was trying to suppress. The man didn't react. He simply kept his eyes on the machines, as though our conversation wasn't anything out of the ordinary. For a moment, there was only the sound of the dryers spinning. I could feel the man's presence beside me, but I didn't dare look at him again. My hands were clammy as I clutched my bag, the urge to leave growing stronger with every passing second. "Don't worry," he said finally, still not looking at me. "I won't tell anyone your secret." I froze, the words striking a nerve deep inside me. What secret? What did he mean? The words hung in the air, heavier than anything I had heard before. "I don't know what you mean," I said again, my voice now more forceful, but my pulse was racing in my ears. The man turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his eyes glinting in the dim light. "I've seen you here before, remember?" he said, his voice still soft but somehow ominous. "Every Thursday, you always sit in the same seat. You always check your watch after 10 minutes. Always." I felt my breath catch in my throat. This time I couldn't deny it. I did have a routine, but how could he know all of that? Had he been watching me for weeks, months? The thought made my stomach twist in knots. The man stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. He turned to face me fully, his eyes never leaving mine. For a moment I thought he was going to say something else, but instead he simply smiled that unnerving smile again. "I'll see you next Thursday," he said, his voice low and final. Before I could respond, he walked toward the door without another glance, the bell above the entrance ringing softly as he left. I stood frozen, my heart racing in my chest. It took a long moment for the noise of the laundromat to return to my senses. The hum of the machines, the faint sound of someone folding clothes, it all felt distant, surreal. I grabbed my laundry, not bothering to fold it, and rushed out of the laundromat as quickly as I could. I didn't look back, not even once. The thought of coming back next Thursday filled me with dread, but I knew, deep down, I would. Story 5. It was late when I pulled into my driveway, the street quiet and empty, save for the occasional flicker of a distant street lamp. My headlights cut through the darkness as I parked, but as I glanced down the street, I noticed something unusual. A car was parked across from my house, its headlights off and the engine quiet. It was an old, dark sedan, nothing that immediately stood out, but something about it felt wrong. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the vehicle. The street was usually empty this time of night, and seeing a car parked so far down the block felt out of place. There was no one else in sight, no reason for anyone to be lingering there. The longer I stared, the more unsettled I felt. The car's presence was like an intrusion on the quiet normalcy of my neighborhood. I decided not to overthink it. After all, it was late, and maybe the driver was just waiting for someone or taking a break. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, the cool night air sending a slight shiver down my spine. As I walked into the house, I tried to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right, but it stuck with me like a persistent itch. Inside, I locked the door behind me and went about my usual routine, changing into comfortable clothes, grabbing a snack, and putting my things down. But even as I settled in, my thoughts kept drifting back to the car outside. The more I thought about it, the more I felt a sense of unease creeping up. Who parks like that at this hour? And why were the headlights turned off? I glanced out of the living room window, hoping to spot the car again. At first, I didn't see anything. The street was empty. I felt a slight sense of relief, assuming that whoever had been there had driven off. Still, my eyes lingered on the dark street, trying to see if any sign of movement caught my attention. But then I saw something. There, just as I was about to turn away, I noticed the faint outline of the car again, now further down the block. The headlights were still off and the car was completely still. I froze, my heart suddenly racing in my chest. Had I just imagined it? Was I seeing things? I quickly stepped back from the window and tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Minutes passed, and I couldn't shake the strange feeling gnawing at me. I decided to take another look, just to calm my nerves. Stepping quietly to the window again, I looked outside, but this time, there was no sign of the car at all. The street was empty once more, as if it had never been there in the first place. Confused, I took a moment to process what had just happened. Had I been mistaken? Maybe I had seen a car earlier but had misjudged the time or my perception. I didn't want to get worked up over something that could easily be explained. So I let it go, telling myself it was just a fluke. I sat down on the couch, trying to push the thoughts from my mind. I turned on the TV, but I couldn't focus on anything. I kept replaying the image of the car, the strange feeling of someone watching from the shadows. Was it just my imagination, or had something more sinister been lurking just outside? About an hour later, I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV, checked that the doors were locked, and went to bed. But as I lay there, with the house quiet around me, the unsettling thought wouldn't leave me. What if someone had been watching me? What if they were waiting for me to leave, or worse, waiting for me to come outside? I tried to calm myself, convincing myself that nothing had happened, that I was overreacting. But sleep didn't come easily. The sound of the wind rustling outside and the occasional creak of the house only added to my anxiety. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I finally managed to drift off. The next morning, I woke up to a bright, sunny day, but the feeling of unease hadn't completely disappeared. I went about my usual routine, but every now and then, my mind would wander back to the strange occurrence from the night before. I found myself checking the windows, glancing out to see if the car was back, even though I knew it was probably nothing. As I went outside to grab the mail, I took a moment to glance down the street. Everything seemed normal, the quiet suburban neighborhood basking in the morning light. The car wasn't there, nor was there any sign of anything unusual. Maybe it had just been a fluke after all. But just as I was about to head back inside, something caught my eye. Across the street, I noticed a man walking toward his car, parked in front of his house. The man seemed average enough, dressed in a casual jacket and jeans, but as I watched, a chill ran down my spine. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he were scanning the surroundings, almost as if he were checking for someone. I shook my head and told myself it was nothing, just another resident starting their day. But a sense of discomfort lingered, and for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that the events of last night were connected. My mind kept returning to that car, that strange, motionless presence down the street. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was being watched. I checked the windows every so often, each time finding the street empty. Still, the feeling that something wasn't right stayed with me. It was like a shadow, following me from the night before, refusing to let go. That night, as I sat on the couch, I couldn't help but glance out the window again. The street was calm, the same as it always had been. But this time I knew something was different. Even though I couldn't explain why the events of the previous night had changed something inside me, I would never look at my quiet neighborhood in quite the same way again. Story 6. I was walking home when I noticed a car following slowly behind me. The headlights weren't too bright, but the car's presence felt off, like it was deliberately trailing me without a reason. I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the nagging feeling creeping up my spine. My footsteps echoed in the quiet street as I glanced back, spotting the vehicle at the far end of the block, keeping its distance but staying with me. When I crossed the street, the car did too. It wasn't a busy intersection, but still the fact that it mirrored my every move made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned my head, pretending not to notice, but it was hard to ignore the faint rumble of the engine behind me. My heart began to race, and I found myself walking faster, trying to shake the strange sense of being pursued. I reached a corner and turned, trying to lose the car in the winding side streets. But to my growing dread, the car sped up, its tires screeching slightly as it followed my every move. It was still far enough behind that I couldn't make out any details, but I could hear the engine revving louder, and I could feel its presence close behind me. I didn't want to panic, but the anxiety was starting to tighten around my chest. My thoughts scrambled as I tried to think of anything to make this stop. I should have turned into a well-lit alleyway or walked toward a busier street. Instead, I kept going straight ahead, unwilling to admit that this was more than just coincidence. The car's headlights were now brighter, casting an ominous glow on the sidewalk. I could hear it following me, gaining ground, and for the first time I turned to face it directly. The car was a nondescript sedan, but it had dark windows, and its grille gleamed like it was hungry for something. It sped up, matching my pace, and I saw the faint outline of a person inside, though their face remained obscured by the shadows. My mind raced. Should I stop and confront them? Call for help? I fumbled with my phone, but my fingers were too shaky to dial anything. Panic surged through me, making it hard to think clearly. The car was now dangerously close, its engine growling as it slowed down just enough to stay on my tail. I was nearing a small park when I spotted a few people sitting on a bench talking and laughing. It was a risk, but I decided to take it. I veered toward the park, hoping the car would pass me by and maybe, just maybe, the person behind the wheel would lose interest. But to my horror, the car followed suit, pulling into the parking lot beside the park. I stopped walking and looked around, hoping to find someone I knew or at least another person who could help. But there was only a young couple on the far side of the park, absorbed in their conversation. I was alone. The car was now parked, the engine idling as the driver stared straight ahead. I swallowed hard, feeling like a rabbit cornered by a predator. The night air was cold against my skin, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic from a nearby highway, but it felt as though the world had quieted, leaving just the ominous silence between me and the car. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't make my legs move. The car's headlights flickered once, and in that moment something inside of me snapped. I took off running. I didn't look back, but I could hear the car start up again, following me once more, the sound of its tires screeching against the pavement. My heart thudded in my chest, every footstep in the dark feeling heavier than the last. I sprinted through the park, past the benches, and toward the streetlight ahead. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to push myself faster, but the car wasn't letting up. The pavement seemed to stretch endlessly, and the air felt thick with dread, making it hard to focus. I could hear it getting closer, the engine growling as the car sped up again, closing the distance. My thoughts became a blur as I neared the next intersection. I glanced quickly to my left, seeing a group of people across the street at a 24-hour convenience store. With no time to waste, I dashed toward the curb and almost stumbled in my haste to get across. I threw myself toward the crowd, hoping they'd see me and someone would realize something was wrong. The car slammed to a halt just before the intersection, its tires screeching loudly. I turned to face it, breathless and trembling, as it sat there in the middle of the street. For a split second, the world seemed to freeze. I could see the driver's face now, just barely, a shadowy figure peering through the windshield. They didn't move. I didn't wait for them to make the first move. I ran toward the group of people, shouting for help, my voice cracking from the fear. The car's engine revved again, the sound menacing as it lurched forward toward the intersection, but it stopped just before reaching the group. The driver didn't get out. Instead, the car just sat there, as though waiting for something. I couldn't explain it. The car didn't follow me into the store parking lot. It just sat there, blocking the street, staring at me from a distance. People began to notice and glance nervously at the car. Some were pulling out their phones, but no one moved too close. The car eventually backed up and sped off, leaving me standing there in a daze. The group around me didn't seem to notice how strange it was for the car to stop and back off so suddenly. I kept glancing toward the street, waiting for the car to return, but it never did. My hands were shaking, and I felt dizzy, like the ground beneath me might give way. I could still hear the rumbling of the engine in my head, and it was hard to shake the feeling that the car was still out there, waiting for me. I didn't walk home that night. I called a cab and had it drop me off at a friend's place instead, my eyes scanning every darkened corner as I made my way to their door. The car didn't follow, but the eerie sensation of being watched lingered in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was behind that wheel wasn't done with me yet. Story 7. I woke up to the familiar sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Blinking into the dim morning light, I reached over and checked the screen. A text message from an unknown number flashed back at me. "Are you still asleep?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the message, trying to make sense of it. I didn't recognize the number, and there was no name attached to it. It felt off, unsettling. My mind raced who would text me at this hour, and why would they ask if I was still asleep? I pulled myself out of bed, the sheets tangled around my legs, and sat up. I was wide awake now, adrenaline kicking in. I quickly typed out a reply, "Who is this?" and hit send. My fingers hovered over the screen as I waited for a response, my eyes darting around the quiet room as if expecting someone to be standing there. A few minutes passed, and the silence seemed to stretch forever. The feeling of unease continued to grow, gnawing at me. My phone buzzed again. This time the reply was quick. "I was just wondering. Thought maybe you'd still be asleep." My skin prickled, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something so casual about the message, yet it made me feel like I wasn't alone. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing just out of sight, watching me. The message didn't sit right with me. It felt like an invasion, an unwelcome intrusion. I hesitated, then typed, "How do you know I was asleep?" The moment I sent it, I regretted it. What if this was some sort of joke? What if it was someone I knew playing a prank on me? Still, the feeling of discomfort lingered. The reply came almost immediately. "I can see you." I froze. My blood ran cold. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, but none of them made sense. How could someone see me? The windows of my apartment were shut tight, the blinds drawn. There was no way anyone could be watching me. I scrambled to check the locks on my door, just to reassure myself. Everything was in place, and yet the words on my screen seemed to echo in my head. "I can see you." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I typed back, my hands trembling. "Who is this? Stop messing with me." A few seconds later, the phone buzzed again. "You're sitting on your bed right now, aren't you?" I glanced at the bed. My heart raced in my chest. How could they know that? My thoughts raced faster than I could follow them. There was no way anyone could have seen me without being inside my apartment. I thought about the front door, the balcony door, the windows. Everything was locked. Everything was secure. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to shake off the rising panic. I felt the walls closing in around me, as though the apartment itself had turned into a trap. The silence that had once been comforting now felt oppressive, like something was waiting just outside the door. I checked my phone again, hoping for some sign of who was behind this. There was nothing. I tried calling the number, but the call wouldn't go through. It went straight to voicemail. The phone buzzed again. This time the message was short: "You should go to the window. I'm right outside." My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to confirm what I was already fearing. But the pull to check was overwhelming, like an invisible force was drawing me toward the window. Slowly, I moved toward the blinds, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there for a long moment, frozen, staring at the closed blinds. The text echoed in my mind, "I'm right outside." I had to look. I couldn't let fear control me. Slowly, I grabbed the edge of the blinds and pulled them aside, half expecting to see nothing at all. But there, in the dim morning light, standing in the parking lot below, was a figure. Just standing there, facing my apartment. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark shape against the gray sky. It was too far away to see clearly, but I knew with a sickening certainty that it was someone looking up at my window. I slammed the blinds shut, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My hands shook as I backed away from the window, my mind spiraling into panic. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sort of prank. The phone buzzed again. "I saw you looking. You were just there, staring out the window." I dropped the phone on the bed and ran to the door, checking the locks once again. Everything was secure. My apartment felt like it was closing in on me, the walls too tight, the air too heavy. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? Someone's texting me from an unknown number and saying they can see me. They'd think I was crazy. I grabbed my phone and typed, my fingers trembling, "Leave me alone." I sent it, not expecting a response. But the phone buzzed again. I almost didn't want to look, but I had to. "It's not a joke. I've been watching you for a while. Don't you remember?" My blood turned to ice. I had no idea who this person was, but they clearly knew things about me that I hadn't told anyone. I felt like I was losing my mind. The panic was so intense I could barely think straight. I dropped the phone on the bed and grabbed my keys. I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed to leave. As I rushed to the door, I looked back at the phone, wondering if I would even be able to escape the fear that seemed to follow me. Story 8. I was browsing through the aisles of my favorite bookstore, lost in the quiet murmur of pages turning in the scent of old paper. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting soft shadows across the rows of books. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just letting my fingers skim over titles, letting the comfort of the space fill me up. I had come here to escape, to lose myself in stories far more interesting than my own. As I turned a corner, I almost collided with someone, a man standing in front of a shelf with a book in his hand. I quickly stepped back, offering an apologetic smile. He smiled back, his eyes lingering a bit too long on my face. "You look better in the dress you wore last week," he said, his voice smooth and casual, as though we had known each other for years. My stomach dropped. I froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. I had no idea who this man was. I wasn't wearing anything particularly memorable that day, just a simple sweater and jeans, and I hadn't been anywhere recently where someone could have seen me in a dress. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. He didn't seem bothered by my silence. He just kept staring at me, that strange, unsettling smile never leaving his face. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and a cold rush of unease washed over me. My eyes darted around, looking for someone else in the store, but the aisles were empty. I was alone with him. Finally, I managed to speak. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've met," I said, my voice shaking more than I intended. "How do you know what I wore last week?" He didn't answer immediately, just continued looking at me with that unnervingly calm expression. He slowly placed the book back on the shelf and took a step closer to me. "I don't forget faces," he said, his words deliberately slow, "especially not ones that stand out." A chill ran through me, and I instinctively took a step back, my fingers brushing the spine of a book for something to hold on to. There was something in his eyes, something too familiar, as if he knew me in ways he shouldn't. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me like a fog. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, forcing myself to stay composed. "I don't think we know each other." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if considering whether or not to continue the conversation. I could feel my heartbeat quickening. I wasn't sure if I was more unsettled by the fact that he recognized me or by the strange confidence with which he spoke. "You were wearing a red dress," he continued, "with the black heels. You looked," he trailed off, as if searching for the right word. "You looked perfect." And I was starting to panic now. I had never worn a red dress with black heels. In fact, I couldn't remember the last time I'd worn anything that bold. And yet he spoke with such certainty, as though he had seen me in that outfit just days ago. My mind raced, trying to piece together where we could have met, but nothing came to mind. "I think you have me confused with someone else," I said, backing up a few more steps. "I don't wear red dresses. I've never worn one like that." He tilted his head, still not breaking eye contact. "Maybe you don't remember," he said softly. "But I remember you. I always will." At that moment, I knew I had to leave. My mind screamed at me to get out, to put as much distance between myself and this man as possible. I turned quickly, walking as fast as I could without breaking into a run. I could feel his gaze on my back as I hurried down the aisle, a strange pressure building in the air around me. I reached the front of the store and looked around, hoping to find the cashier or anyone else. The store was eerily quiet. No one was at the register, and the rows of bookshelves seemed to stretch on forever, empty and silent. I glanced back, my pulse hammering in my chest. The man was gone. I waited for a moment, trying to steady my breath. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe he was just an eccentric customer who thought he knew me. But the way he had looked at me, the way his voice had sounded, there was something off. Something that didn't sit right. I stepped toward the exit, my hand trembling as I pushed the door open. The cool air hit my face, and for the first time I felt a little relief. I made my way quickly to my car, the silence of the parking lot pressing down on me. My hands shook as I started the engine, but I tried to calm myself. I pulled out of the lot and drove home, but the unease didn't fade. It clung to me like a second skin, lingering in the pit of my stomach. Once I got home, I checked the locks on my doors, double-checked the windows, and then sat down on my couch, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The man's words kept repeating in my mind. You were wearing a red dress with black heels. How could he have known that? How could he have remembered something I hadn't even done? It wasn't until later that night, as I was preparing for bed, that I realized something else. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, had a notification. I picked it up and unlocked the screen, my stomach dropping when I saw the message. It was from an unknown number. The text read, "I saw you today. You looked better in the dress you wore last week." My breath caught in my throat, and a wave of cold dread washed over me. Story 9. I pulled into the gas station just outside town, the fading evening sun casting long shadows across the pavement. My car's gas light had been blinking for the past few miles, and I was relieved to finally be at a stop. The station was quiet, tucked away in a stretch of road that didn't get much traffic, with only a few other cars parked at the pumps. I stepped out of the car, the cool air brushing against my face as I stretched, ready to refuel and continue my journey. I glanced over at the other car at the pump beside me, a rusty old sedan, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. The man sitting in the driver's seat caught my eye. He was staring directly at me, his face hidden in shadow. It was odd, the way he didn't look away. Most people, when they realize they're being watched, look away quickly, but this man didn't. His gaze lingered, unsettling in its intensity. I tried to shake off the feeling that had settled in my chest and turned to fill up my gas tank. My fingers fumbled with the nozzle, but I kept glancing back at the man. He was still staring, his head tilted slightly as if assessing me. I could feel my heartbeat picking up, and I told myself I was overreacting. It was just a guy at a gas station. There was nothing unusual about that. But the longer I stood there, the more his presence felt unnerving. He wasn't moving, not even to adjust his position in the seat. I looked away and focused on finishing up, trying to ignore the prickling feeling creeping up my spine. As I replaced the nozzle, I glanced back at his car, and I was relieved to see he had finally turned his head, as if he had noticed my gaze. I finished paying inside and walked back to my car, trying to maintain a calm facade. The man's car was still there, but he wasn't at the pump anymore. He had slid into the driver's seat and was now idling. I opened my car door, my movements slow and deliberate as I tried to gather myself. The moment I started my engine and pulled out of the parking lot, I saw him in my rearview mirror. The sedan was moving behind me, following at a distance that was just close enough to make me uneasy. I tried to brush off the feeling, but it lingered. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just heading the same direction. But I couldn't shake the sense that I was being followed. I drove for a few miles, the road empty and straight, but the sedan stayed behind me, matching my speed. I made a turn, hoping to lose him, but the car followed, a few lengths behind. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, my nerves on edge. I didn't recognize the car, and I didn't recognize the man. There was no reason for him to be following me. I glanced around, looking for a place to pull over, but the road stretched on without any turnoffs. I could see the headlights of the sedan in my mirror, the car unwavering in its pursuit. My mind raced. Should I call the police? Or was I just being paranoid? I couldn't decide, but I felt trapped. I passed a small town up ahead and decided to pull into a gas station I'd never been to before. I needed to get off the road and see if the car would keep following me. As I turned into the station, I glanced back again. The sedan was still behind me, just as I had feared. I parked my car and went inside the small convenience store, keeping my eyes on the door. The man's car had stopped at the pump, a few spaces down from mine. I pretended to browse, trying to act casual, but the back of my neck prickled as I kept glancing toward the door. I watched through the window as the man filled up his gas tank, his body stiff and rigid, like he was aware of my watchful gaze. There was something off about him. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he was savoring the moment. He didn't seem in a rush at all. I felt a surge of panic build up in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, the man finished fueling, but he didn't drive off. Instead, he sat in his car for a long moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel. I wondered if he had seen me watching him, if he knew I was nervous. Was he waiting for me to make a move? I turned to leave the store, but my stomach dropped when I saw him walking toward the door, his eyes fixed on me through the window. It was like he knew I was trying to escape, and he was waiting to see what I would do next. I quickly grabbed a bottle of water, my hands shaking, and rushed to the checkout. When I stepped outside, I immediately headed for my car, my heart pounding. I dared not look behind me, afraid of what I might see. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the door, trying to calm myself. Just as I was about to start the engine, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. My blood ran cold. The sedan had moved from its pump and was now parked beside my car. The man stood by the door, just a few feet away, watching me. I stared at him, not knowing what to say or do. He hadn't said a word since the gas station, but the way he was standing, the way he was looking at me, it was like he was waiting for me to make the first move. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The seconds stretched into minutes, and I just sat there, unsure if I should drive away, stay put, or confront him. I glanced at my side mirror, hoping for an escape route, but I couldn't see anything that would help. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned away and walked back to his car. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, but when he slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I knew I wasn't safe yet. He pulled out of the gas station right behind me, just as he had done before. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't going to stop following me, that no matter where I went, he would be there, always one step behind. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I tried to figure out what to do next, but deep down I knew I couldn't outrun him. Story 10. I was on a train, sitting by the window, watching the cityscape blur as we sped through the suburbs. The rhythmic sound of the tracks beneath us was soothing, and I had settled into a comfortable silence, lost in my thoughts. The train was crowded, but I found a seat across from an older man, his face partially hidden by the pages of a newspaper he was reading. I didn't think much of it at first, just another commuter on his way to somewhere. It wasn't until I noticed a slight movement from the corner of my eye that I started to feel uneasy. The man across from me had lowered his paper and was holding his phone in his lap. At first, I assumed he was texting, but the subtle angle of his phone made me realize he was looking directly at me. My heart skipped a beat as I watched him tilt the phone ever so slightly, the lens pointing right in my direction. He was taking pictures of me. I glanced down at my own phone, pretending to scroll through messages, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every few seconds I saw his phone shift just a little, trying to get a better shot. It wasn't obvious, at least not to anyone else on the train, but it was unmistakably clear to me. My skin prickled with discomfort, and I tried to avoid making eye contact, hoping he'd stop. But he didn't. Instead, he seemed to grow more confident with each click of the camera. My pulse quickened, and a wave of anger surged through me. Was this some sort of sick joke? I shifted in my seat, attempting to move out of his line of sight, but he adjusted, following me with the camera. I had to confront him. I couldn't sit there pretending it was okay anymore. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor as I made my way over to him. He didn't seem surprised at all, as though he'd been expecting me. I leaned in slightly, my voice low but firm. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. "Stop taking pictures of me." He looked up at me slowly, his eyes calm, almost too calm. The corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile as he lowered his phone, almost as if the situation was amusing to him. "It's not illegal," he replied, his tone nonchalant, as if I were overreacting. His words hit me like a slap, and I took a step back, unsure of how to respond. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. I wanted to say more, to yell at him, but something in his demeanor unnerved me. He didn't look like a threat, he wasn't aggressive or hostile. He just seemed detached, as though he was playing some strange game. "That doesn't make it right," I said, my voice shaky but still firm. I could feel the eyes of other passengers on us now, but no one seemed to intervene. The train car hummed with the dull sounds of conversation and the clinking of coffee cups, as if nothing unusual was happening. He tilted his head, almost as if he were studying me. "It's just a photo, nothing more. No harm done," he said, the smile never leaving his face. He raised the phone again, pointing it toward me, but this time I slapped it out of his hand, the device falling to the seat between us. The man blinked, surprised, but his smile never faltered. He didn't even seem angry. In fact, he seemed more intrigued than anything. "Don't touch my phone," he said, his voice barely rising above a whisper. Yet his calmness only made my frustration grow. "You don't know anything about me or my rights." His words felt like an accusation, a challenge. I wanted to shout at him, to tell him to delete the pictures, but the truth was, I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know if I was even in the right. The train continued to rattle along the tracks, the noise almost deafening now. The air felt thick, and I could feel my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Why hadn't anyone else said anything? Why had no one stepped in? I turned to look around the car. A few people were watching, their eyes briefly flicking over us before quickly looking away. Others were too absorbed in their own devices to care. No one seemed willing to get involved. I took a step back, my legs trembling slightly. The man was still sitting there, his eyes locked on mine, his smile unchanged. He wasn't threatening me physically, but his words, his presence made me feel vulnerable. "You should leave now," he said softly, his gaze drifting back to his phone, "before you make things worse for yourself." I felt a surge of panic but forced myself to remain calm. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flustered. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The door to the next car was a few feet away, and I was just about to make my way toward it when I heard his voice again. "Don't worry," he said, his tone suddenly soft, almost soothing. "I didn't keep any of the pictures." I hesitated, unsure of whether to believe him, but the way he said it didn't feel reassuring. It felt empty, like another manipulation. The train was slowing now, and I could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. I walked toward the door, my steps quick but deliberate. Before I left, I glanced back at the man one last time. He was still staring at me, his phone now resting in his lap. His smile faded, replaced by an unreadable expression. I stepped off the train at the next stop, my mind racing. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I couldn't stop thinking about that smile, the way he acted like nothing was wrong. But there was something deeper, something unsettling about the whole encounter that I couldn't shake. Maybe it wasn't illegal, but it didn't feel right. I didn't know who he was or why he'd been watching me, but something about it had felt invasive. I wanted to forget about it, to move on, but as I walked through the station, I couldn't help but feel like I was still being watched. Story 11. The line at the drive-thru was moving slowly, the air heavy with the sound of engines idling. I had just finished a long day and was looking forward to a quick meal. As I inched closer to the window, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The car behind me was a dark sedan, its headlights casting an eerie glow against the dim evening sky. I thought nothing of it, just another customer waiting for their turn. When I pulled up to the window, the cashier greeted me with a smile. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with dark eyes that seemed a little too wide. I handed over my payment and was about to grab my order when she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The guy in the car behind you asked for your name." I froze, the words sinking in like a stone. I hadn't seen anyone in the car behind me get out, but it felt strange to be mentioned at all. I looked into the rearview mirror again, but the sedan was still there, idling in place. The driver's face was hidden behind the tinted window, and I couldn't make out any details. It was a strange feeling, like something was off. "Wait, what do you mean?" I asked, unsure if I had heard her right. The cashier didn't seem fazed. In fact, her expression didn't change at all. "He asked for your name," she repeated, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "He said he knows you." A chill ran down my spine and I felt my skin prickling with unease. I had no idea who could be in the car behind me. The thought of someone knowing my name, someone I didn't recognize, made my pulse race. My mind started to spiral with questions. Was it a prank? Did I know this person? I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, thick and uncomfortable. I quickly grabbed my food, thanked the cashier, and drove off without another word. As I pulled out of the drive-thru, I kept my eyes on the sedan behind me. It was still following, but it wasn't tailing me closely. It kept a steady distance, like it was waiting for something. I took a few turns, trying to lose the car, but it stayed right behind me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. What if it was someone I knew? What if it was a mistake? But nothing about this felt like a mistake. The whole situation felt wrong, like I was being watched. I turned onto a side street, hoping to get some space, but the sedan followed, its headlights reflecting in my mirror. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on me. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe the driver was just in the same area, but the coincidence felt too strange. A thought hit me suddenly. Had the cashier really whispered that message? Maybe I had imagined it. But when I glanced at the receipt in my hand, my heart skipped a beat. The cashier's name was written on the top, just above the order number, Lily. I didn't know a Lily, at least not recently, but the name was oddly familiar, like it was something I should know. I glanced back at the mirror again, the sedan still there, still following. This time I made a sharp right turn onto a narrower street, hoping to lose the car, but it mirrored my move. Panic began to seep in, spreading through my chest like wildfire. The driver knew something I didn't, and I didn't like it. I pulled into a well-lit gas station, hoping to break the chase. As I parked, I watched the sedan slow down, then turn, disappearing into the night. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe I had read too much into the cashier's words, but a nagging doubt lingered. I decided to call my best friend Sarah. I needed to tell someone what was happening, just to make sure I wasn't overreacting. She picked up on the second ring, sounding groggy. "Hey, what's up?" I quickly told her about the incident, the odd whisper from the cashier, the man asking for my name, and the car that had followed me. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and I could almost hear Sarah's mind working. "Wait," she said, "what did the cashier look like again?" I paused. The question caught me off guard. I tried to recall her features, but my memory felt blurry, like it was being clouded by something I couldn't quite grasp. She was young, dark eyes. I don't know. Why? "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice uncertain. "But I think I've seen her before. Maybe not her exactly." But she trailed off, and I could tell she was thinking hard. "Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks. You've been really stressed lately." I didn't feel stressed, though. I felt exposed, like something was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't hold on to it. "I don't know, Sarah. I feel like I'm losing control of what's real and what's not." "I'll come over," she said, her tone suddenly more serious. "Just stay where you are. Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way." I hung up and sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring at the gas station lights as they flickered against the darkened sky. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. Who was that guy in the sedan? Why had he asked for my name? And what was it that Lily had whispered? When Sarah finally arrived, I was still parked at the gas station, eyes fixed on the parking lot. She walked over to my car, a concerned look on her face. "You okay?" I nodded, trying to calm myself. "Yeah, I just don't know what happened back there. I can't shake the feeling something's off." Sarah glanced around the parking lot and then back at me. "I don't see anyone. You're probably just paranoid. It's been a weird night." But even as I agreed with her, a nagging voice in my head told me this wasn't over. I had no idea what was happening, but something was clearly out of place. As Sarah and I walked into the gas station, I caught a glimpse of a man standing near the counter, just behind the cashier. It was him, the man from the sedan. He didn't look at me, but when I locked eyes with the cashier, she smiled. The same dark smile from earlier, and for a split second, I saw her eyes flash with recognition. I turned and walked quickly out of the store, my pulse pounding in my throat. Whatever was happening, I wasn't prepared for it, and now I was sure I never would be. Story 12. I was waiting for my rideshare when the driver pulled up and said, "You're not who I was expecting." I froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. The car wasn't the usual model I had requested, but it was still a rideshare vehicle, and the name on the app matched. I stared at the driver through the tinted window, trying to make sense of the situation. The driver's face was partially obscured by the rearview mirror, but I could see his eyes sharp, unsettling. He wasn't smiling, but there was something about his demeanor that made me feel uneasy. The words echoed in my mind. "You're not who I was expecting." Who was he expecting then? I had never had a rideshare driver speak to me like this before. I hesitated, still standing by the curb. The driver's eyes flicked toward the app and then back at me, almost as if waiting for me to climb into the car. I considered canceling the ride, but something inside me urged me to stay calm. It was probably just a misunderstanding, right? Maybe the driver had mixed up the names. I approached the car slowly, trying to brush off the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. As I opened the back door, the driver spoke again. "You sure you're the right person?" His voice was low, almost too calm. I nodded, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Yeah, that's me," I said, my voice sounding more uncertain than I intended. The driver didn't respond immediately. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. I slid into the back seat, trying not to let the tension show. The moment I buckled my seatbelt, the car began to move, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The silence between us was thick, broken only by the hum of the engine. I checked my phone, trying to focus on something else. My heart was still racing, but I kept telling myself it was nothing. It was just a strange comment. That's all. Yet, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the driver wasn't telling me something, that maybe he knew something I didn't. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror. He was staring straight ahead, his hands gripping the wheel with a tightness that made me uneasy. The further we drove, the more I started to notice how quiet the streets were. The city should have been busy at this hour, but there was a strange emptiness, as though everyone had suddenly disappeared. I tried to push the thought out of my mind. "Where are we headed?" the driver asked, his voice breaking the silence. I gave him the address, but he didn't reply. He just nodded and continued driving, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. It felt like the world outside the car had blurred into the background, as if everything had become distant and unimportant. Minutes passed, but I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. The driver had yet to say anything else. I tried to make small talk, asking him how his day had been, but he only grunted in response. His eyes never left the road. It was like I wasn't even there. The streets became narrower, and the buildings grew more rundown. This wasn't the route I usually took to my destination. In fact, I didn't recognize the area at all. My pulse quickened as I glanced out the window, trying to get a sense of where we were. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow over the abandoned buildings that lined the road. I felt my throat tighten, my instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. "This isn't the way to my destination." The driver didn't answer at first, but then, after a long pause, he spoke. "We'll get there soon enough," he said in a flat tone. I didn't know how to respond. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I thought about the emergency button in the app, but something told me that wasn't going to help. I didn't want to antagonize the driver. He could always cancel the ride and leave me stranded somewhere strange. But I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I looked out the window again, trying to find something familiar, some sign of where we were, but there was nothing. The buildings were old and decaying, the streets devoid of life. The car seemed to be moving slower now, as if it was deliberately taking its time. My heart hammered in my chest, and I fought the urge to demand that he stop the car. Suddenly, the driver broke the silence. "It's better this way," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You shouldn't have taken the ride in the first place." The words made no sense. My heart stopped for a moment. What was he talking about? Why did it feel like he was talking to someone else, like I wasn't the person he was expecting? I turned my head, trying to catch his eyes in the rearview mirror, but he was still staring straight ahead. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you mean better this way?" But he didn't respond. The car continued its slow journey, the streets growing darker with every passing block. I had to act. I had to do something. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone, unlocking it with shaking hands. My thumb hovered over the emergency button in the app, but before I could press it, the car came to a stop. The sudden jolt of the brakes threw me forward and I gasped, my hand grabbing the seatbelt instinctively. The driver turned to look at me then, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. This time there was something dark in his gaze, something unsettling. "This is your stop," he said, his voice cold. The door on the passenger side clicked open. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the car, not daring to look back. I ran as fast as I could, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. I didn't stop until I reached a well-lit street, panting and dizzy from the adrenaline. The sound of the car's engine faded into the distance, but I didn't stop running until I reached a nearby store and ducked inside. My legs shook, and my heart thudded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I never saw the driver again. I don't know if he was waiting for someone else, or if he had simply vanished. But I knew one thing: I had narrowly escaped something far worse than a wrong turn. Story 13. The Story 13. The house was quiet, too quiet for a Friday night. I had just settled onto the couch with the kids, who were already asleep upstairs. It had been a relatively calm evening. The parents left for a quick dinner, leaving me to watch over their home and children. I hadn't expected anything unusual to happen, but something about the stillness of the house gave me an unsettling feeling. I was flipping through a magazine when the sudden ringing of the house phone startled me. It was strange, considering no one else was home, and the phone had been sitting on the kitchen counter since the parents left. I hesitated, staring at the receiver as if it might bite. No one ever used the house phone, especially not while the parents were away. I picked it up cautiously, holding it to my ear. "Hello," I said, trying to sound normal, though my voice came out shaky. There was a long pause on the other end, just silence at first, and then the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing. My blood ran cold, and I froze for a moment. It didn't make any sense. I was alone in the house. The kids were asleep upstairs. I couldn't think of anyone who would be calling the house phone at this hour, let alone breathing so heavily into it. I tried to clear my throat, hoping it was just a prank or a wrong number, but my instincts told me otherwise. "Hello? Who is this?" I asked again, my voice more insistent, but still the same ragged, labored breathing responded. It was getting harder to ignore the tightness in my chest. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I hang up, call the parents, or maybe dial 911? But before I could act, a soft whisper broke the silence. "Are you alone?" the voice asked, barely audible through the static. The words sent a chill down my spine, and I felt my heart race. I wanted to hang up, wanted to do something, anything, but I felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the coldness of the question. I forced myself to speak again, though my voice barely rose above a whisper. "Who is this? Where are you?" But there was no answer, just more breathing. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it as if it might reveal some hidden truth. What was happening? Then, the line went dead. The sudden silence that followed was worse than the breath. The ringing had stopped, but the tension in the air hadn't. My hand trembled as I set the receiver back into its cradle, my mind racing. The house phone was not a cordless one, meaning the person calling had to have been inside the house. But that was impossible, wasn't it? I tried to calm myself down. There had to be some logical explanation. Maybe it was just a wrong number, someone messing around. But even as I thought it, I knew it didn't feel right. The whisper, the breathing, it was too intentional. I stood up, heart hammering in my chest, and walked cautiously toward the stairs. The kids were still asleep, or at least they should be. I peeked into their rooms to make sure everything was normal, quiet, dark, and undisturbed. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the knot in my stomach didn't ease. I walked back into the living room and grabbed my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment as I debated calling the parents. They wouldn't be back for another hour, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. But after a moment of indecision, I called anyway, listening to the phone ring as I paced the room. When they finally picked up, I explained what had happened, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed my unease. "I just got a call from the house phone," I told them. There was no one on the line, but I could hear breathing. "It's probably nothing, but I thought I'd let you know." There was a brief silence on the other end. "That's really strange," the mom said, her voice sounding distant. "You're sure the kids are okay?" "They're fine," I replied quickly, trying to reassure her, but my nerves were fraying. "They're asleep." The parents told me to stay on the phone with them until they got back. I agreed, but the unsettling feeling only grew as I sat back on the couch, my eyes darting around the room, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. The house seemed even quieter now, like the walls were closing in. I turned on the TV for some background noise, but the static sound from the screen only heightened my paranoia. Then, just as I started to settle into the idea that I had imagined the call, the house phone rang again. My stomach dropped, and I didn't need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. My hand shook as I reached for the receiver, praying it wasn't happening again. "Hello," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. This time there was no breathing, no whispering voice. Instead, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible sound coming through the phone. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the house. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I listened, heart racing. I didn't wait for the voice to come back. I slammed the receiver down and immediately bolted for the stairs. I called out to the kids in their rooms, urging them to stay quiet. As I checked each room, I felt an eerie sense of dread creeping over me. Something was wrong. I backed into the hallway, near the kitchen, when I heard a sound footsteps coming from the living room. I didn't move, not sure if I was hearing things or if someone was really there. The house felt like it was holding its breath. The sound grew louder, closer. I felt my legs shaking, but I forced myself to take action. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a heavy bookend from the shelf, and held it tightly in my hand. Slowly, I moved toward the living room, my heart thudding in my chest. When I reached the doorway, I saw nothing. The room was empty, as quiet as before. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I turned to leave the room, but as I did, I caught a glimpse of something, a shadow moving quickly near the kitchen. I didn't wait to investigate further. I ran back upstairs to the kids' rooms, locking the doors behind me. I didn't stop to breathe until I heard the sound of the front door opening. The parents had returned. They rushed inside, confused by my panic. I tried to explain what had happened, but it didn't make sense to them. In the end, they chalked it up to a prank, maybe even from one of their friends. But I knew better. The house phone hadn't rung since that night, but I'll never forget the feeling of being alone in that house, listening to the soft sound of footsteps moving through empty rooms. Story 14. I was sitting in my office, the clock showing 2:42 a.m., working late as usual. The building was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the soft tapping of my keyboard. I had grown used to the stillness, the emptiness that came with being the only one in the building at this hour. It was one of the things I enjoyed about working late: no distractions, no interruptions. As I typed up an email, I heard a faint click from the hallway. The motion sensor lights flickered to life, casting long shadows across the floor. I frowned, glancing up from my screen. There was no one there. The building was empty, or at least it was supposed to be. I hadn't heard anyone enter or leave. I got up from my desk, my chair creaking in the stillness of the room. Walking to the door, I peered out into the dark hallway. The lights illuminated the corridor in a sterile, almost clinical way, casting harsh shadows against the walls. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The hallway was empty, just like I expected. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The silence stretched on, the lights above buzzing quietly. Maybe it was just a glitch, I told myself. Motion sensor lights sometimes turned on for no reason. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. I stepped into the hallway, walking slowly toward the end where the lights had turned on. My footsteps echoed in the quiet, and for a moment, I felt as though I was being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia. The building was secure, nothing out of the ordinary could happen here. Yet the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. As I neared the hallway's end, I noticed something odd. One of the office doors was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it that way, nor did I recall hearing anyone walk by recently. The door to the conference room, normally locked at night, was open just a crack. I frowned, my curiosity piqued. I approached the door cautiously, my heart beginning to beat faster. The light above flickered as I reached for the handle. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open just enough to peer inside. The room was empty, just like it should have been. Nothing was disturbed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I stepped back, but as I did, I heard a soft shuffle behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I turned quickly. The hallway was still empty. There was no one there, nothing that could explain the noise. Yet I was certain I had heard it. My pulse quickened as I scanned the empty corridor, my mind racing. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, trying to steady my nerves. I turned to go back to my office but froze mid-step. At the far end of the hallway, by the stairwell, I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was hard to make out, but there was someone or something there. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked, and when I looked again, the figure was gone. I stood frozen, my mind scrambling to explain what I had just seen. Had I imagined it? Was I just tired? Or had someone really been there, watching me? The lights flickered again, this time more violently, and I jumped. The building had been prone to electrical issues before, but it didn't feel like a glitch now. There was something unsettling about the way the lights stuttered and buzzed. The shadows seemed to shift around me, growing darker, deeper, as if something was lurking just out of sight. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I looked back down the hallway. Nothing. No figure. No movement. Just the emptiness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that someone was still there, waiting. I rushed back to my office, slamming the door behind me. My hands trembled as I sat back down at my desk, the familiar click of the keyboard now feeling strangely alien. I tried to focus on the screen in front of me, but my mind kept drifting back to the hallway. The lights, the figure, the odd shuffle. I forced myself to continue working, trying to ignore the rising panic in my chest. The air in my office felt suddenly heavy, oppressive, as if the building itself was watching me. Every small sound, every creak of the building made my heart race. I glanced nervously at the clock. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever. Then, just as I thought I was starting to calm down, I heard it again. A soft shuffle. This time it was coming from inside my office. I whipped around in my chair, my eyes scanning the room. But nothing was out of place. The door was still shut, the blinds still drawn. No one could have come in without me hearing. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. My breath was shallow as I made my way to the door, cautiously opening it. The hallway was still empty, the lights burning bright above me. But something was different. The air felt colder now, thicker. The building seemed more oppressive, more alive. I walked toward the stairwell, where I had seen the figure earlier. My footsteps were slower this time, heavier. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but I felt an overwhelming urge to get to the bottom of this. I reached the stairwell door and pushed it open. The hallway was as quiet as ever, the lights casting long shadows. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a voice. It was faint at first, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. My name. Hello. I called out, my voice cracking. There was no response. The voice had sounded so close, but now everything was silent again. I stood there, frozen in place, the sound of my own breath the only thing filling the air. My eyes darted around, my mind frantically searching for any explanation. The motion sensor lights flickered one last time before going dark again, leaving me in total blackness. The whispering voice came again, but this time it was clear. You shouldn't be here. I turned and ran. Story 15. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when the text alert popped up. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or maybe a random message from a wrong number. But when I glanced at the screen, my heart skipped a beat. It simply said, "See you soon." No name, no other context, just those 3 words from an unknown number. I stared at it for a few moments, trying to figure out who might have sent it. I had no idea who this person was or how they had my number. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and certainly not someone who would send a cryptic message like that. My first instinct was to brush it off as a wrong number. But something about it, the lack of any identification, gnawed at me. It felt deliberate, and that made me uneasy. I stared at the number on the screen, wondering if it was a prank, or perhaps someone I'd forgotten about. I typed a quick reply, "Who is this?" and waited. For a few minutes, nothing came through. The more I waited, the more my mind began to race with possibilities. Was it someone I had met recently? Or was it someone with ill intentions? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my phone buzzed again. I quickly unlocked the screen, hoping for a more definitive answer, but the response was just as cryptic as the first. "You'll know soon enough." The words were simple, but the cold finality of them sent a chill down my spine. Who was this person? And why did they feel the need to send me these strange messages? My hands began to tremble as I sat there, staring at my phone. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend or even the police, but I wasn't sure what I would say. How could I explain that I had received a text from a number I didn't recognize saying only "see you soon"? I couldn't even begin to describe how unsettling it felt. My thoughts spiraled out of control, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if they were watching me? What if they were planning to show up at my door? I checked the time, 9:42 p.m. It was late and the streets outside were quiet, the only noise coming from the occasional car passing by. I had lived in this neighborhood for years and nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened. Still, tonight felt different. I checked the locks on the door and made sure all the windows were secure. It was a strange feeling doing all of this because of a text, but it felt necessary. Another message pinged on my phone and I jumped in surprise. My pulse quickened as I unlocked the screen. This time the message was even more unsettling. "I'm already here." My stomach dropped. I glanced out the window, but the street outside was empty. The only light came from the street lamps, casting long shadows across the pavement. There was no sign of anyone, no car parked outside, no movement. But the message, it made it feel like the sender knew something I didn't. I snapped into action, pacing around the house, checking every corner, making sure the doors were locked again. The tension in the air was palpable, as if something was about to happen, but I couldn't tell what. I stood by the window, trying to peer into the darkness, but the silence of the night was suffocating. Was someone actually outside, or was it all in my head? I picked up the phone again and dialed the number. The line rang for a few moments before going straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I sent another text, "Who is this?" What do you want?" I pressed send and held my breath, waiting for the reply that never came. I stared at the phone, the silence stretching on, and in that silence my imagination began to run wild. What was the purpose of these messages? Were they trying to scare me, or was there something more to it? Minutes dragged by and I found myself staring out the window again. My mind kept racing, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was someone from work, someone I hadn't seen in a while, a distant relative or an old friend. But why wouldn't they just tell me who they were? Why the cryptic messages? I heard a noise at the door, a soft, barely audible knock. My heart skipped a beat and I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially after everything that had happened. My first instinct was to check the peephole, but I hesitated, fear creeping up my spine. What if it was the person who had been texting me? What if they were standing right outside, waiting for me to open the door? I backed away from the door and moved toward the phone again. I stared at the screen, trying to decide what to do. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. Panic surged through me, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of sick joke. I stepped cautiously to the door, peeking through the peephole. No one was there. Just the empty porch, bathed in the dim glow of the porch light. My shoulders slumped in relief, but the strange feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. I slowly opened the door, checking the porch one more time. Nothing. No sign of anyone. I closed the door and locked it again, my pulse still racing. The messages had stopped, and the knock had been nothing more than a fluke, right? But the eerie silence that followed made me feel like I was being watched, even though I knew no one was there. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something wasn't right. Hours passed, but I couldn't shake the unease. The feeling of being watched lingered, as if the person who had sent those messages was still out there, waiting for something. I checked my phone one last time before going to bed, half hoping to see a message explaining everything. But there was nothing. The phone sat still in my hand, a reminder of the unknown person who had reached out to me and the unsettling possibility that they were still out there. Story 16. I came back from vacation and found my bedroom closet door open. I never leave it open. When I left for my trip, everything was exactly as it should be. Doors closed, the house locked up tight. But now, standing at the threshold of my room, the closet door was slightly ajar, the darkness inside almost inviting. A chill ran down my spine. I walked toward the closet, my footsteps making soft tapping sounds against the hardwood floor. The door creaked as I pushed it open, half expecting to find something out of place, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The closet was as I remembered, clothes hanging neatly, shoes lined up along the floor, but something about the way the door had been left open felt wrong. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the closet, trying to shake the creeping feeling of unease that had settled in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I had been in a rush when I left and forgot to check the door. But no, I never forget things like that. I always close the door. Always. I took a step forward and reached for the light switch, flicking it on. The closet illuminated, revealing the same familiar sight. Nothing seemed out of place. My clothes, my shoes, my bags. But why was the door open? I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something had changed, something subtle but unsettling. I checked the floor, looking for any signs of disturbance, scuff marks, anything that might explain the door's odd position. But everything seemed untouched. No dust was displaced, no footprints, no sign of anything unusual. Still, the unease wouldn't leave me. It was as if the room itself had shifted, and I wasn't in control of the space I'd always felt safe in. As I stood there, staring at the closet, a strange thought crossed my mind. What if someone had been in my room? What if while I was away, someone had used the house? The thought was absurd. I locked the door when I left. I had taken precautions. Still, the idea of someone invading my personal space made my skin crawl. I walked out of the closet and checked the rest of the room, checking for anything that felt off. The bed was undisturbed, the dresser untouched. The window was shut, the curtains hanging just as I had left them. But still, something felt wrong. A silence filled the room, thick and heavy, as if something was holding its breath. I looked back at the closet, the open door standing there like an invitation I didn't want to accept. A wave of dizziness washed over me as I approached it again, my heart racing in my chest. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, and then I did something I didn't think I'd do. I stepped inside the closet. The air inside felt different. A little cooler, a little heavier. I looked around, my eyes scanning the shelves, the corners, the back wall. Nothing had changed, but the space felt smaller, more confining. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself, and that's when I noticed a small piece of paper tucked into the corner of the closet shelf, barely visible. I pulled it out carefully, unfolding it with trembling fingers. The paper was yellowed, old, and the ink on it had smudged in places. But the words were clear. "I've been watching you." My stomach lurched, and I dropped the paper as if it had burned me. I stepped back, my heart thudding in my chest. There was no way this could be real. No way someone could have been in my room, writing notes in my closet while I was away. But the paper was real, and the words felt so personal, so intentional, that it was impossible to ignore. I picked up the paper again, this time holding it at arm's length as if it might come to life. My hands shook as I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. Had someone broken in? Had someone been watching me all this time, even while I was on vacation? I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out the quiet in the room. The closet door creaked behind me, making me freeze. My body went stiff as I slowly turned around, my eyes scanning the empty room. The door was still open, but the sound had come from somewhere inside the closet. The thought of looking back into the dark corners of the space filled me with dread, but I had no choice. I stepped toward the door and closed it with a firm push, the click of the latch echoing in the silence. I stood there for a few moments, taking in slow, steady breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I left the room and went downstairs to check the rest of the house. Everything seemed normal, but the air felt heavier, somehow. The walls felt closer. I checked the windows and doors again, making sure they were all locked. I hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary when I came in, but the thought of someone being in my house while I was gone had my nerves frayed. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down. My mind kept returning to the paper in the closet and the words on it. I had to know more. But as much as I wanted to feel reassured that nothing was wrong, a quiet voice in the back of my head told me to be careful. I grabbed my phone and called my friend, telling them about what had happened. They listened patiently, offering comforting words, but I could hear the concern in their voice. They asked if I had checked the house for any signs of forced entry. I hadn't, but the thought of doing so only made the idea of being alone in the house that much worse. My friend suggested I call the police, and after a long pause, I agreed. The officers arrived within minutes, and I led them upstairs, explaining everything. They checked the entire room, including the closet, but found no signs of someone breaking in. The paper, though, was another story. They took it with them for fingerprinting, but they assured me there was no immediate danger. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The officers left and I locked up the house again, but the dread that had settled in my chest hadn't gone away. My bedroom felt foreign now, like a place I no longer belonged. The closet door was shut tight, but I knew that whatever had been left behind, whatever had watched me, was still there, waiting for me to return. Story 17. I sat in my car, the engine off, waiting for my friend to finish his errand. It was late, and the parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few scattered cars. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound in the still night. I leaned my head back against the headrest, staring out through the windshield at the empty street beyond. A few minutes passed before I heard it, faint at first, like a soft tap. I straightened up in my seat, my gaze snapping to the side. It came again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the passenger side window. I whipped my head to the right, my heart skipping a beat. There, standing just outside the car, was no one. The empty pavement stretched in both directions, lit by the cold glow of streetlights. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I just stared, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. The car was locked, the windows rolled up. There was no reason for someone to be outside my car, tapping on the window. I thought maybe it was just the wind, a trick of sound. But the more I stared, the more I felt like I was being watched, as if the space around me had thickened with an eerie pressure. I looked away, trying to calm my nerves, but then the tapping came again. This time it was louder, sharper. My hand shot out instinctively to unlock the door, but I hesitated before I could grab the handle. I was alone in the car, right? So why was someone knocking on my window? I couldn't ignore it anymore. I took a deep breath, my fingers still hovering over the door lock. It felt like time had stopped. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled into something I didn't understand. I glanced back out the passenger window, hoping to see something, anything. But the space was still empty, just shadows and the quiet street beyond. The tapping came again, louder this time, as though someone was determined to get my attention. I froze, my mind racing. There was no mistaking the sound now, it was right there, coming from the window beside me. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a random noise. Someone had to be there. My pulse quickened as I slowly turned my head, looking out the window again. I felt a cold shiver creep down my spine. There was still no one. I could see the outline of the streetlight reflected in the glass, casting an eerie glow. But not a single person stood outside. I opened the door, slowly, my nerves on edge. The night air hit me like a blast, colder than I expected for this time of year. My eyes scanned the empty parking lot, the same stretch of concrete I had seen only a few moments ago. There was no one in sight, not a soul. I closed the door with a quiet click, confused and unsettled. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the tapping was just a trick of the wind or some odd noise from the car itself. But the longer I thought about it, the more certain I was that someone had been there, right outside my window. A deep unease settled over me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I scanned the lot again, my eyes darting from one empty space to the next. Still nothing. It didn't make sense. I was sure someone had knocked. It couldn't have just been my imagination. I started the car, the engine rumbling to life, but the unease didn't go away. I drove slowly out of the parking lot, keeping my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. But there was nothing. just the empty street stretching behind me, the headlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I thought I was fine, that the strange moment in the car had been some fleeting weirdness. But as I turned a corner, I saw a shadow moving at the edge of my vision. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. There was nothing there when I looked in the side mirror. I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The sensation of being watched only grew stronger. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, to the street behind me. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself I was just on edge after what had happened in the parking lot. But something was wrong, and I couldn't shake it. I pulled into a nearby gas station, hoping the familiar surroundings would calm my nerves. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows over the empty lot. I stepped out of the car, the chill of the night air hitting me in waves. I tried to shake off the creeping sense of dread that clung to me, but it was hard to ignore. I walked into the convenience store, trying to distract myself. But the moment I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled, and I froze. Something made my blood run cold. I could feel the weight of someone's gaze on me. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no one standing in the store. The aisles were empty, and the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator units. Yet I felt like I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if someone was standing just behind me, watching. I quickly grabbed a bottle of water and made my way to the counter, my mind racing. The cashier gave me a polite nod, but I couldn't help but feel her eyes lingering on me a little too long. I hurried out of the store, back to my car, and drove off, trying to shake the feeling of being followed. The rest of the drive home was uneventful, but by the time I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been out there. The tapping on my window, the strange sensation of being watched, it all felt too real to ignore. I parked the car, my heart still pounding. As I grabbed my keys, I glanced around the yard, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing. The night was silent, still, almost too quiet. But just as I was about to step inside, I heard it again, a soft, familiar tap on the passenger side window. Story 18. I had stopped at a rest area just off the highway to stretch my legs and grab a coffee. It had been a long drive, the kind of drive where the road stretches on forever, and the only sound is the hum of tires against pavement. I had been alone for hours, and the quiet of the rest stop felt like a small, peaceful reprieve. The place was empty, save for a few cars parked along the lot, and I relished the solitude as I stepped out of my car. I walked over to the vending machines, my steps echoing in the stillness. As I reached for a bottle of water, I noticed a woman sitting on one of the benches near the picnic tables. She seemed out of place, her posture tense, her eyes darting from one car to the next. I didn't think much of it, assuming she was just another traveler taking a break. I put the water in my hand, about to head back to my car, when she suddenly stood up. Her movement was quick, almost frantic, and she was already walking toward me before I had a chance to react. The moment she reached me, she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "You back in your car. Don't talk to him." The words hit me like a cold slap, and for a moment, I just stood there, stunned. The woman's eyes were wide, filled with a kind of frantic urgency that sent a chill down my spine. She glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to be watching, and then back at me. "Who?" I asked, my voice shaky, unsure if I should even be engaging with her. "Who are you talking about?" She looked around again, her gaze darting nervously to the parking lot and then back to me. Her lips trembled as she spoke, but she was still whispering, her words coming out in a rush. "The man in the truck. The one who just pulled up. Get in your car and drive away. Don't wait, don't hesitate." I glanced toward the lot, my eyes landing on a black pickup truck that had just parked a few spaces away. A man was sitting in the driver's seat, his face obscured by the tinted windows, but I could see him watching me, his silhouette unmoving. I tried to shake off the unease that crept up my spine, telling myself it was nothing, just a coincidence, just a nervous traveler. But the woman was still staring at me, her expression growing more desperate by the second. "Please, you don't understand. He's been following people. He's been here before. Get back in your car. You don't want to be here when he gets out." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The woman's urgency felt too real to ignore, but I couldn't understand why she was so adamant. Was I in danger, or was I just overreacting to a stranger's paranoia? The man in the truck hadn't moved, but there was something about his stillness that unsettled me. I took a step back, my eyes still on the truck, and glanced at the woman. Who is he? Why is he following people? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and grabbed my arm, her fingers cold and tight around my skin. Her grip sent a shock through me, and for a moment, I wondered if I should just run. But the woman's eyes softened, and she lowered her voice even further. "He's been doing this for months. He picks people out, watches them, and then he follows them. I don't wait around for him to make the first move." Her words were cut off by the sound of the truck door opening. I spun toward the noise, my heart pounding in my chest as the man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a baseball cap that hid most of his face, but I could feel his gaze on me. It was unnerving, the way he just stood there, watching. The woman pulled me back, her grip tightening once more. "Don't look at him. Just go. Now." Without thinking, I turned and hurried toward my car, the woman following closely behind. I could hear the man's footsteps behind us, slow and deliberate, but I didn't dare look back. My keys were in my hand, my fingers shaking as I fumbled to unlock the car. I slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, locking it instantly. I didn't even have time to start the engine before the woman's hand was on my window. She was panting, her face pale and drawn. "Please don't stay here. He's not going to stop. He's done this before." Before I could respond, I saw the man walking toward my car, his steps measured and steady. He didn't seem rushed, but there was something cold in his expression, something that made my heart race. The woman stepped back, her face filled with fear. I didn't know what to do. Should I drive away? Should I call the police? My hands gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing for a solution. The man was getting closer now, and I could see the outline of his face. His eyes were locked on mine, his expression unreadable. "Please, just go," the woman urged. "He's not who he seems to be." I slammed the car into reverse without thinking, my tires screeching as I pulled out of the parking space. I didn't look back, but I could hear the woman's voice, faint but urgent, as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, my hands still shaking on the wheel. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Who was that woman? Why had she warned me? And what was the deal with the man in the truck? I pulled into a gas station, my heart still hammering in my chest, and took a moment to catch my breath. I hadn't felt this scared in a long time, and the whole situation felt surreal. Was it a coincidence, or was there really something off about that man? I didn't know the answers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something dangerous. Story 19. I was in the middle of my workout, focused on the treadmill and trying to push myself harder. The gym was relatively empty at this hour, just a few regulars scattered around, each immersed in their own routines. I had been coming to this gym for months, and the familiar hum of the machines and the occasional clink of weights was comforting. I was trying to zone out, making sure I got my cardio in before heading home, but my focus broke when I felt someone step onto the treadmill next to me. I glanced over and saw a man standing there, adjusting the settings on his machine. He was older than me, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with short, graying hair and a rugged look to his face. He wasn't unusual looking, but there was something about his presence that felt oddly invasive. He wasn't just getting on the treadmill, he was watching me. I tried to ignore it, assuming he was just another person trying to get their workout in. But after a few moments, he turned his head toward me. "I've seen you at the grocery store too," he said, his voice casual but with an unsettling undertone. I felt my heart skip a beat, and for a split second, I wasn't sure if I'd heard him right. I slowed my pace on the treadmill, unsure of how to respond. I forced a nervous smile, trying to brush off the awkwardness. Yeah, I guess we run into each other a lot around here," I said, not sure what else to say. His statement was odd, but maybe it was just a coincidence. After all, the grocery store wasn't far from the gym, and people did tend to cross paths in a small town. But as I glanced over at him, I noticed the way he was looking at me, like he was studying me. It wasn't a casual glance, it was deliberate, calculating. "I don't miss much," he continued, almost as if he hadn't heard my response. "I'm in that store 3 or 4 times a week, and you're always there around the same time, aren't you?" His words hung in the air like a thick fog, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. There was no way this could just be a coincidence. The gym, the grocery store, it was starting to feel like he was keeping track of my routine. I forced myself to keep moving, turning up the speed on my treadmill to avoid standing still. "I guess I'm irregular," I said, my voice a little more strained than I intended. I tried to focus on the screen in front of me, hoping he would take the hint and drop the subject. But he didn't. Instead, he matched my pace on his treadmill and kept talking. "You come in around the same time every week. You're a creature of habit, aren't you?" His voice was low, almost too low, and there was something about it that made my skin crawl. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but it felt harder now, like I couldn't catch my breath. Was I overreacting? Maybe it was just a weird coincidence, but it didn't feel like it. "I like routines," I said, my voice a little shakier now. I was desperately trying to stay calm, to maintain some sense of normalcy, but his words were starting to weigh on me. It wasn't normal for someone to be so observant of another person's schedule, to watch their every move. For the next few minutes, the man remained silent, but his presence was like a shadow at my side. I could feel his eyes on me, and it was making it nearly impossible to concentrate. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I wasn't sure what his intentions were, but I knew one thing for certain: he made me feel unsafe. When I finished my workout, I quickly wiped down the treadmill and grabbed my water bottle, hoping to make a quick exit. I tried to act casual, to not make it obvious that I was trying to avoid him, but as I walked toward the exit, I heard him call after me. "See you at the store again soon," he said, his voice almost too chipper. It was like he was saying goodbye to an old friend, except there was no warmth in his tone. It was too familiar, too unsettling. My skin crawled and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I didn't even bother with the locker room. I just grabbed my bag and walked out into the parking lot, my pulse racing. I scanned the area, half expecting to see him following me, but there was no sign of him. I quickly got into my car and locked the doors, my hands trembling as I started the engine. The gym's parking lot was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. On my way home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced that his car would appear behind me at any moment. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that his behavior wasn't just strange, it was invasive. He had been watching me at the gym, tracking my habits, and now it seemed like he was keeping tabs on me outside of the gym as well. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was always one step behind me, waiting for me to make a wrong move. I tried to rationalize it. It was probably nothing, just a coincidence. But the way he had looked at me, the way he knew things about my schedule, it didn't sit right. I didn't go to the gym the next day. I didn't go the day after that either. I started changing my routine, taking different routes to the grocery store, and I avoided the gym for a week. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid, but I wasn't willing to take any chances. Eventually, I returned to the gym, but I kept my head down, avoiding any eye contact with anyone. The man didn't show up for several weeks, and I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But just as I was starting to feel comfortable again, I saw him standing near the weights, watching me from across the room. And this time, when our eyes met, he smiled. It was the same smile he'd given me at the gym that day, and the chill that ran down my spine told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't done watching me. Story 20. I was hiking alone, the trail winding through the dense forest, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional call of a distant bird. The air was crisp, and the morning fog hadn't yet fully lifted, casting a mysterious haze over the path ahead. It had been a while since I'd been out here, and the quiet solitude felt both peaceful and unsettling. I was used to hiking alone, but something about today felt different, like I wasn't as alone as I thought. I continued up the trail, my boots sinking slightly into the soft earth with each step. The trees around me grew thicker, their trunks towering above me like silent sentinels, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out as if they were reaching for me. I stopped briefly to adjust my backpack, wiping the sweat from my forehead, and that's when I noticed it. Just ahead, on the bark of a large pine tree, was something strange, something out of place. A single Polaroid picture, pinned to the trunk with a rusted nail. My heart skipped a beat as I walked closer, my curiosity tugging at me. The picture was old, its edges frayed and yellowed with time. My fingers hesitated for a moment before I pulled the picture free, the nail coming out with a faint screech. I turned it over, expecting it to be a random snapshot of the forest or a wildlife scene, but instead I froze. The picture was of me. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing. The image was clear, but it was taken from a distance me, standing on this very trail, just a few feet ahead. I looked almost frozen in time, caught mid-step, the trail behind me stretching out into the thick woods. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the picture, my mind racing. Who had taken this photo? And why was it here, pinned to a tree in the middle of the forest? I turned the photo over, searching for any markings or clues, but there was nothing, no date, no message, just the haunting image of me. My hand shook slightly as I stuffed the photo into my jacket pocket, the weight of the discovery settling heavily on my chest. I stood there for a few moments, trying to gather my thoughts, but the quiet of the forest seemed oppressive now, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. I glanced around, half expecting someone to step out from behind a tree, but there was no one. Just the endless stretch of the trail ahead, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, and the uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. I had always enjoyed the solitude of hiking alone, but this was different. It felt like I was being watched, though I couldn't see anyone. I turned back toward the trail, my instincts telling me to leave, to head back to the trailhead. but curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know more. I continued down the path, my steps faster now, the sound of my breathing loud in my ears. The photo burned in my pocket, its mystery weighing heavily on my mind. My thoughts raced, trying to make sense of it. Could it have been a prank? Someone else hiking on the same trail? But no, the image was too clear, too precise. It was taken recently. There were no signs of wear or fading that would suggest it had been lying there for years. The deeper I walked into the woods, the more uneasy I became. The forest felt different now, its shadows darker, the trees thicker, their branches seeming to close in on me. I checked over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me, but again, there was nothing. The forest was still, the only sound the faint crunch of my boots on the earth. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was as if someone or something was always just out of sight, watching me. The trail continued to twist and turn, and I tried to push the feeling of dread from my mind, focusing instead on the beauty of the forest around me. But even the beauty seemed tainted now. The trees were too close together, the underbrush too thick. It was like walking through a maze, one that seemed to go on forever. My pace quickened, and soon I was almost running, desperate to get to the end of the trail, to the safety of the parking lot, where the sight of other hikers would calm my nerves. But as I rounded a bend, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, just ahead of me, was another tree with something pinned to it. I could barely make out the shape from this distance, but my heart leapt in my chest as I recognized the familiar outline of a Polaroid picture. I didn't need to get closer to know what it was. I already knew. This time I didn't hesitate. My breath quickened as I approached the tree, and I ripped the picture off without even checking to see how it was attached. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned it over, dreading what I would see. The picture was another photo of me, taken from behind this time, as I had been walking down the trail. I could see the back of my head, my shoulders, my backpack, and the path ahead. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the image itself, it was the figure in the background, barely visible but unmistakable. A shadowy figure, standing just off the trail, watching me. I dropped the photo in shock, my hands trembling as I stumbled backward. The figure in the picture was too clear, too deliberate. Someone had been following me, and they had been doing it for longer than I realized. I turned, panic surging through me, and began to run down the trail. I didn't care about the trail anymore, about where I was, or how far I had to go. I just needed to get out of the woods, away from whatever was out there watching me. The sound of my own footsteps pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. But just as I was about to reach the clearing, I heard something behind me, a faint rustling of leaves, a twig snapping. My heart leaped into my throat, and I didn't stop to look back. I ran faster, not stopping until I reached the parking lot, where I collapsed against my car, gasping for breath. I fumbled for my keys, desperate to get inside and lock the doors, but as I looked back at the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Story 21. I had been away for only a few days, visiting friends out of town, when I received a notification. The sudden ping of my phone pulled me out of the conversation I was having, the text flashing on the screen, "Person detected." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't due back home for another 2 days, and I hadn't expected any unexpected activity while I was gone. I stared at the screen, trying to calm the flutter of anxiety building in my chest. I clicked the notification, opening the live feed from my home security camera. The picture was grainy and dark, but I could make out the vague outline of someone standing just outside my front door. The figure didn't move, just standing there in the shadows, barely visible under the porch light. My pulse quickened. No one was supposed to be there. I thought about calling my neighbor, but they had left town too, visiting family for the weekend. I felt alone, helpless. I sent a quick message to my best friend, asking her to check in on my place, but the seconds dragged on and no response came. The figure outside remained still, almost as if it was waiting for something or someone. I checked the time. It was just past midnight. The quiet of the night only seemed to make the situation feel worse. I could still see the figure, its outline barely moving, the camera capturing only its dark silhouette. I zoomed in on the footage, straining to see any details, but the image only became more distorted. Whoever it was, they weren't doing anything suspicious, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just stay in the dark, hoping the figure would leave on its own. I considered calling the police, but I didn't have any concrete evidence that something was wrong, just a shadow in the night. I took a deep breath and tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a passerby, someone with a legitimate reason for standing at my door. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Why hadn't they knocked? Why didn't they leave? The longer I stared at the screen, the more certain I became that something wasn't right. I tapped the microphone icon on my phone, debating whether or not I should speak into the camera to let the person know I was watching them. Before I could make up my mind, the figure shifted. Slowly, it took a step forward, its movement jerky and deliberate. I held my breath, unable to look away as the person moved closer to the camera's view. There was something unsettling about the way they moved, like they were too aware of the camera's presence. I felt my heart race. Just then, the camera feed blinked. For a split second, the screen went black before the image came back, but the figure was gone. My stomach dropped. The momentary silence made the absence of the figure even more disturbing. I quickly checked the other cameras around my property, hoping to spot them elsewhere, but nothing. Not a single movement. I checked the time again. Only a few minutes had passed since I first got the notification. I felt like I was losing my mind. What had just happened? How could someone have just vanished like that? My fingers were trembling as I tapped through the security app, refreshing the feed, hoping for some kind of explanation. But nothing. My phone buzzed again this time. It was a message from my best friend. "Hey, I just saw your message. I'll check on your place now, but I don't see anything unusual in the footage. I think it's fine." I almost laughed in disbelief. Was she looking at the same footage? Did she not see the same thing I had? I typed a quick reply. "Someone's outside. I saw them." They were just standing there. I waited for her to respond, but as the minutes passed, I became more and more agitated. I wasn't sure if I should wait for her to check things out or take action myself. The feeling of being powerless, of not being able to do anything, gnawed at me. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a trespasser, or worse, someone trying to break into my house. As I continued to watch the feed, I saw something move again, this time near the side window. The figure was back, but now they were closer to my house, standing just outside the window, looking in. My breath caught in my throat. Why hadn't I noticed this before? The figure seemed to be staring right at the camera. For a moment I couldn't breathe, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. Then, in a blur of motion, the figure stepped back and disappeared behind the wall of my house. I tried to remain calm, but my hands were shaking, the phone slipping slightly from my grip. I heard the familiar sound of my friend's reply coming through. "I'm here. I'm going around the house. Just stay where you are." Her text gave me some comfort, but not much. I felt like I was on the edge of discovering something I wasn't ready to know. I kept my eyes on the feed, trying to make sense of what was happening. The figure was gone again, but this time I didn't feel relief. I felt dread. I tapped into the live video once more, hoping to catch something, anything. The house was still silent. No sign of anyone. But as I scrolled through the footage, something caught my eye. The camera angle had shifted. The lens had been moved slightly to the left, just enough to be noticeable. I froze, the blood draining from my face. How could that have happened? I had set the cameras up myself before I left, and there was no reason for them to shift. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whoever had been outside wasn't just watching my house, they were inside it now. I didn't wait for my friend. I called the police. My heart pounded in my chest, the seconds feeling like hours. As I hung up, I noticed the last message from my friend. "I'm not seeing anything. The doors are all locked. It's fine." But I knew it wasn't fine. I knew I wasn't crazy. There was someone in my house, and they had been there for longer than I realized. Story 22. I was sitting in my car at a parking lot when a man knocked on my window and said, "You're exactly how I imagined." My heart skipped a beat. The parking lot was nearly empty, with just a few cars scattered around. I wasn't expecting anyone, and yet, here he was standing at my window. A strange smile stretched across his face. I glanced at him through the glass, trying to get a read on his expression. He looked ordinary enough, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, wearing a worn jacket and jeans. But there was something unsettling about the way he stood there, so confident, as if he already knew me. I rolled my window down just enough to hear him better, but I was careful to keep a safe distance. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice a little shakier than I intended. "Do I know you?" His smile widened, but his eyes remained fixed on mine. "No, but I know you," he replied. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." My stomach churned, and my pulse quickened. I didn't recognize him, but there was something about his tone that made my skin crawl. He took a step back, giving me some space, but not enough to make me feel comfortable. "I've been following you," he continued, his voice low but steady. "I knew you'd be here at this time in this car." I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest like a stone. What did he mean, "I knew you'd be here"? Who was this person, and why was he talking to me like we had some kind of connection? I quickly locked my doors, the sound of the click echoing in the quiet lot. My thoughts raced, trying to process what was happening. He hadn't given me a name, and he didn't look familiar. Was he some kind of stalker? A fan of mine? Or was this just some random guy with a strange, unsettling fixation on me? I glanced around, hoping someone else might be nearby, but the lot remained deserted. He didn't seem bothered by the lock. Instead, he took a step closer, his face now just inches from the window. "I know you think this is strange," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I've been planning this for a while." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. My body was frozen, caught between the instinct to drive away and the overwhelming fear that if I did, things might escalate. "What do you want?" I finally managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. The man took a deep breath, like he was savoring the moment. "I just wanted to see you. I've been watching you for months, studying your routine." I felt my blood run cold. "What? Watching me? Why?" His smile faltered for a brief moment before returning with a strange intensity. "Because I had to make sure you were real, that you were exactly how I imagined." I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How could he have been watching me for months? My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone else standing behind me. The parking lot still felt empty, but the air had grown thick with tension. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my fingers trembling. Should I drive away? Was it safe to stay? I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. "I don't know who you are," I said firmly, "but you need to leave." My voice came out more assertive than I felt, but it was the only thing I could think to do. The man didn't move, though. Instead, he stared at me with those unnervingly calm eyes. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I just wanted to see you, to confirm that you were real." The words didn't make sense. Who was he? Why was he so fixated on me? I scanned the lot once more, hoping for any sign that someone might be watching or nearby. Nothing. Just silence. The man's presence filled the space around me, making the air feel thicker with each passing second. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. I wasn't sure what his intentions were, but I didn't want to take any chances. I had to get away. I pressed the gas pedal slightly, inching my car forward. The man stepped back, but his eyes never left mine. "I'll be seeing you again soon," he said, his voice still oddly calm, even as I started to pull away. My heart was pounding now, and I kept my eyes on him through the rearview mirror as I drove away, not daring to look away until he was nothing but a speck in the distance. The words "I'll be seeing you again soon" echoed in my mind, making my skin crawl. I took a few turns, driving aimlessly to shake off the feeling of being watched. The adrenaline surged in my veins, and my thoughts scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. Who was that man? How had he known where I would be? My mind kept racing, but no answers came. It felt like I was stuck in a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. By the time I reached a well-lit area, I could feel my body begin to relax, but the unease lingered. I parked at a gas station, checking my surroundings before I even thought about getting out of the car. I felt paranoid, but I couldn't help it. That man's words, those unnervingly specific, cryptic words, kept repeating in my mind. I sat in the car for a while, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. I pulled out my phone, unsure of who to call. Should I report it to the police? Was this just some random encounter, or was it something worse? I wasn't sure what to do, but I couldn't just ignore it. The man knew too much, and that was the part that terrified me the most. As I sat there, staring out the window, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. His words, his expression, the way he seemed so sure of himself, it all felt wrong. I had no idea who he was or what he wanted, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to forget that encounter. And somehow, deep down, I had the unsettling feeling that he wasn't done with me. Story 23. I had planned a simple afternoon at the mall, hoping to find a new jacket and maybe grab a coffee at the food court. The mall was busier than usual, with families and teens milling around, but it was nothing out of the ordinary. I walked through the main entrance, the bright fluorescent lights above buzzing softly, and made my way to the first store on my list, a clothing boutique I had been meaning to check out. As I browsed through the racks, flipping through the shirts and jackets, I noticed a man standing near the entrance. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap that obscured most of his face. At first, I thought nothing of it. He seemed to be casually looking around. I continued shopping, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the store. A few minutes later, I moved on to another section of the store, and to my surprise, I saw the same man following me. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just glancing around, his eyes occasionally drifting toward me. It was subtle, almost as if he were casually following my movements. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overreacting. but the feeling of being watched lingered. I picked up my pace, moving to a different section of the store, hoping to lose him in the crowd. But no matter where I went, I saw him in my peripheral vision, always just a few feet behind me. My heart began to race, and I started feeling self-conscious, wondering if I was just being paranoid. Was I imagining things? After a few minutes, I decided to leave the store and head to another part of the mall. I quickly walked through the entrance, but as I passed by a kiosk selling accessories, I spotted him again. There he was, standing by the wall, as though he was waiting for something or someone. His posture was unnervingly still, and his eyes, though I couldn't fully see them, seemed to be fixed on me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to make myself believe it was just coincidence, that maybe he was shopping like me. But the closer I walked, the more aware I became of his presence. I walked faster, glancing behind me. Sure enough, he was still there, maintaining the same distance. My anxiety spiked, and I ducked into the nearest store, hoping to shake him off. Inside, I pretended to look at a display of shoes, trying to keep my breathing steady. But when I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him again, standing near the entrance. He hadn't even taken a step into the store, he was simply watching me from the threshold. I quickly turned away, pretending to examine a pair of boots, but I couldn't focus on anything. My mind was racing. I decided to leave the store as quickly as I could, stepping out into the main mall area. I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't sure why he was following me, or if it was just a coincidence, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I walked through the mall, trying to blend in with the crowd, but as I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him again. He was at the far end of the hallway, standing between two shops, watching me from a distance. My heart pounded in my chest, and I quickened my pace, moving toward the food court, hoping to blend in with the crowd. The sounds of laughter and chatter from the people around me did nothing to ease the tension building in my stomach. As I entered the food court, I felt a slight sense of relief, surrounded by the noise of people eating and chatting. I found an empty table and sat down, trying to calm myself. I looked out over the area, trying to relax, when my eyes fell on him again. He was at the opposite end of the food court, standing by a pretzel stand, his gaze trained on me. He wasn't looking at the food or the people around him, he was watching me, unmoving. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone from my purse and texted my friend, telling her I felt uncomfortable and needed to leave. I wasn't sure if I was being dramatic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had to get out of there. I stood up quickly, keeping my head down as I moved through the food court. I was trying not to look behind me, but I knew he was there. I could feel his eyes on my back. The more I tried to walk calmly, the more my heart raced, and I found myself moving faster, weaving through the crowd toward the exit. Just as I neared the door, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, heart leaping in my chest, but it wasn't the man, it was a mall employee, a young woman with a name tag. She looked at me with concern. "Are you okay? You seem a bit shaken." I tried to steady my breathing, my mind still fixated on the man. "I think someone is following me," I said, my voice trembling. The employee's face softened with empathy. "Let me escort you to the security office, just to make sure you're safe," she suggested, and I nodded, too relieved to argue. She led me through a back corridor toward the security office, her steps quick and reassuring. But as I passed by a mirror, I couldn't help but glance at my reflection, and I saw the man again, standing by the entrance, his gaze still fixed on me. I stopped dead in my tracks, my blood running cold. "He's here," I whispered. But when I turned back to point him out, he was gone. The entrance was empty. My heart was pounding in my chest as I looked around the corridor, trying to find him, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The employee escorted me to the security office, and they checked the mall cameras. But when they reviewed the footage, they couldn't find anyone who matched his description. No one had followed me through the stores, no one had been standing at the food court, and no one had been watching me at the door. I left the mall soon after, still feeling the eyes of the man on me. But as I stepped out into the parking lot, I looked around. There was no one. The mall was quiet now, the afternoon crowd dissipating. I couldn't shake the feeling, though, that he had been following me the entire time, and I still don't know why. Story 24. I stood at the counter, waiting for my coffee, the smell of freshly brewed espresso filling the air. It was an ordinary morning, the kind where you find yourself on autopilot, moving through the routine of the day. The soft murmur of conversations around me, the sound of milk frothing, and the click of the espresso machine were the usual background noise. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, scanning the room while I waited for my order. The barista, a friendly woman with dark hair tied back in a messy bun, called my name and handed me the steaming cup. "Here you go," she said, offering a warm smile. As I reached for the drink, she added, almost casually, "That man over there paid for it. He said he knows you." I paused, my fingers hovering over the cup, and glanced toward the direction she had gestured. A man sat at a corner table, hunched over a laptop, his attention focused on the screen. He was unremarkable in appearance, about my height, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. But something about him made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't recognize him. Not at all. "Wait, what?" I stammered, still holding the cup. "He knows me." The barista shrugged, clearly uninterested in the details, as if this sort of thing happened all the time. But I was taken aback. I couldn't recall ever seeing this man before, much less talking to him. My mind raced, trying to piece together any possible explanation. Had I met him at a party or somewhere I didn't remember? I turned back to the counter, my heart beginning to race. "Are you sure?" "I don't think I know him," I said, my voice low, unsure of what to think. The barista nodded, still smiling. "He said he's seen you around," she replied, her tone light, as if it was all perfectly normal. "And that he'd take care of your coffee today. He seemed nice." I stood there, frozen for a moment, the cup still in my hands. Something about the way she said it, so casually, felt off. Why would someone buy me coffee if I didn't even know who they were? Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she had gotten the wrong person. I glanced back at the man, but he hadn't moved. He was still engrossed in his laptop. I forced myself to take a sip from the cup, trying to calm my nerves. The coffee tasted normal, nothing strange or off about it, but the situation was beginning to feel more and more unsettling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I could feel my pulse quicken as I debated whether or not to approach him. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to leave it alone. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he had just seen me somewhere and decided to do something nice. Or maybe I was overthinking things. I turned toward the door, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. As I pushed the door open, a voice stopped me in my tracks. "You're leaving so soon." I spun around to find the man standing behind me, his voice low and smooth. He was much closer now, standing by the counter. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt like I couldn't look away. I felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic force drawing me in. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, his expression softening slightly. I just wanted to do something nice for you. I know you're busy, but we've met before, haven't we?" My breath caught in my throat, and a wave of confusion washed over me. "No," I said, my voice more firm this time. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've met." The words felt heavy, like I was trying to convince myself more than him. He smiled, but there was something odd about it. "Are you sure? You seem familiar." His gaze lingered on me for a moment too long, making me feel exposed, like he was studying me in a way that made my skin crawl. "Maybe it's just the coffee. You always drink it black, right?" My mind whirled. The fact that he knew that detail unsettled me even more. I didn't remember telling anyone that I didn't even order coffee that way at every shop. In fact, I'd only started drinking it black recently. I gave him a stiff nod, but my heart was pounding now. "Look," I said, taking a step back. "I really don't know you. I appreciate the coffee, but I have to go." I turned quickly, exiting the cafe before he could respond. My hands shook slightly as I clutched the coffee cup, trying to push away the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I didn't look back as I walked down the street, but I could feel the weight of his gaze on my back. My mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of the conversation. I didn't know him. I had never seen him before in my life. But he knew something about me, something I hadn't told anyone. I tried to shake it off as I walked to my car, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. There had to be a reasonable explanation, right? Maybe I had met him briefly at a work event, or he was just some overly friendly stranger who liked to make connections. But as I drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at me, how his eyes lingered a moment too long. The next morning, I returned to the cafe, determined to forget about the strange encounter. I approached the counter, trying to ignore the anxious feeling that gripped me. The same barista from the day before was working, and she smiled at me when I walked in. "Back for your coffee?" she asked cheerfully. I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, I was just wondering, the man who paid for my coffee yesterday, did he come in again today?" "Ah." The barista paused for a moment, then shook her head. "Nope, haven't seen him. You're the first customer this morning." A wave of unease swept over me again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The man had known too much about me, and now he was gone without a trace. I didn't know who he was, but I had a sinking feeling I wasn't going to forget his face anytime soon. Story 25. I stepped into the changing room, the scent of fabric softener and fresh clothes filling the air. It was a quiet afternoon at the store, with only a few other shoppers wandering the aisles. I was trying on some clothes, distracted by the fabric and the soft hum of the store's music. I didn't think much of it when I closed the curtain of the changing stall behind me, blocking out the rest of the world for a few minutes. As I pulled the dress over my head and examined myself in the mirror, I noticed something strange. A faint sound reached my ears, a slow and rhythmic sound breathing. I froze, listening intently. It was coming from the stall next to mine. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. The sound was heavy, deliberate, like someone trying to keep their breath steady. My mind raced with questions. Was someone else in there with me? Maybe they were trying on clothes too, and I hadn't noticed them when I came in. I glanced at the divider between the stalls, the thin gap at the bottom, but I couldn't see anyone's feet. The air felt thick with tension, and the sound of breathing only intensified. I held my breath, trying to listen, but the more I focused, the more unsettled I became. Why was it so quiet otherwise? I couldn't stand it any longer. My curiosity got the best of me, and I crouched down, peering through the narrow space between the divider and the floor. I was hoping to catch a glimpse of feet, shoes, anything that would confirm someone else was in the next stall. But as my eyes followed the dark floor beneath the divider, I saw nothing, no shoes, no legs, no sign of anyone. The breathing continued, slow and measured, but no one was there. I felt a wave of confusion and unease wash over me. How could there be breathing if no one was in the stall? I quickly stood up, my heart racing. Was I imagining it? Was it some sort of trick of the mind? Or had I somehow missed seeing someone slip in before me? I pulled the curtain open a little wider, stepping out of the stall to take a better look. The changing room was empty, except for a lone bag left on one of the benches. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what was happening. The breathing from the next stall persisted, almost as if it was coming from somewhere beyond the physical space of the room itself. My pulse quickened, and I took a cautious step toward the stall next to mine. My hand hovered near the curtain, but I hesitated before pulling it aside. What if someone was hiding there? What if they were waiting for me to open the curtain? After a long pause, I mustered the courage to pull the curtain back, revealing the empty stall. There was no one in there. No one standing. No one sitting. The space was completely vacant, as though the stall had never been used. I stared at the emptiness for a moment, feeling the air grow heavier with each passing second. The breathing had stopped, but the silence that followed felt like an even more menacing presence. I backed away, my instincts telling me to get out of there, to leave the changing room as quickly as possible. I quickly pulled my dress back on and grabbed my belongings, my hands shaking as I hurriedly gathered them. I wanted to run, to get out of the store, and forget the strange experience. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My feet felt like lead as I made my way to the door, my mind still racing with confusion. I glanced back at the changing stalls one last time before I left, hoping to see something, anything that would explain what I had just experienced. But everything looked normal. The curtains were drawn, the stalls empty. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was just being paranoid, but the memory of the breathing clung to me like a shadow. It wasn't just a noise, it had been real, and it had come from an empty stall. I walked out of the changing room and into the store, trying to shake off the unease that followed me. But it lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I told myself it was nothing, that I had been imagining things, that the space was small and my mind had played tricks on me. But every time I passed a row of changing rooms or saw a stall with the curtain drawn, I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. As I paid for my clothes and left the store, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to follow me. The air outside felt lighter, fresher, but the memory of what happened stayed with me. I tried to convince myself that it was just a weird experience, a trick of the mind, but the sensation of being watched, of hearing that breathing, refused to fade. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My thoughts kept drifting back to the empty stall, to the sound of breathing that came from nowhere. The store had seemed so normal, so mundane, but now it felt like a place where something had slipped through the cracks, something that didn't belong. I closed my eyes, but the memory of that quiet, rhythmic breathing lingered, keeping me wide awake. Story 26. I came home and found a note on my doorstep. "I like your hair this way." The handwriting was neat, elegant even, and the paper was a rich cream color, almost too pristine to be left on the ground. I stood there for a moment, staring at the note, my mind racing. I hadn't been out for long, only a few hours. There was no way someone could have seen me leave, and even if they did, it didn't make sense. How could they know what my hair looked like if they were just watching from the outside? I bent down to pick up the note, my fingers trembling as I held it between them. My hair was freshly styled that morning. Nothing unusual about it, just a simple braid I had spent extra time perfecting. But the thought that someone might have been watching me, paying such close attention to details like that, sent a cold shiver down my spine. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing just out of sight, but the street was quiet, empty. I stood at the door for a few more seconds, holding the note in my hand. My first instinct was to throw it away, to forget about it, but something about the message felt so personal, so unsettling. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had left it knew me, had been watching me for longer than I realized. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, my pulse quickening as I closed the distance between myself and the small note I had left on the doorstep. The house felt quieter than usual, the walls pressing in a little too close. I glanced at the living room, checking for any signs of disturbance. Nothing seemed out of place, but the stillness in the air felt heavy. My mind kept replaying the note over and over, as though it was some sort of puzzle I couldn't quite solve. Who would leave such a message, and why? I dropped the note on the kitchen counter and began to pace. My thoughts were all over the place. Could it have been a friend, playing a strange prank? But no one I knew would do something like that without a clear explanation, and they would have at least signed their name. It didn't feel like a joke, it felt like someone who had been watching me, learning about me, and now they were speaking to me in a way that was too intimate. I thought about the small details. My hair. Was there something about it that made me stand out? It was long, dark brown with subtle waves, nothing too remarkable. But maybe that was the point. Someone had paid enough attention to it to leave a note about it, and that thought was almost worse than if they had left a more general message. I tried to tell myself that I was overreacting. It was just a note after all. People left notes all the time, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I checked the locks on the windows and doors again, even though I knew they were secure. The thought of someone standing just outside watching made my skin crawl. The last time I had seen anyone near my house was when I came home a few hours ago, but I hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. I sat down at the kitchen table, still staring at the note. It felt like it was staring back at me. My thoughts were jumbled, my anxiety rising with each passing minute. The idea that someone was out there, watching me, made me feel so vulnerable. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone left me a note about my hair. It sounded ridiculous, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like it wasn't just a harmless gesture. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping across the floor. I walked back to the door, peering through the peephole, scanning the street for any sign of movement. The streetlights cast long shadows, but there was no one in sight. Still, the feeling that someone was nearby, lurking just out of sight, gnawed at me. I opened the door slightly, just enough to peek outside, but there was no one there. My phone buzzed on the counter, interrupting the silence. I almost jumped out of my skin as I grabbed it, relieved to see a message from my sister. She was just checking in, asking how my day had gone. I replied quickly, telling her everything was fine, though I left out the detail about the note. It felt silly, telling her that I was scared of a piece of paper, so I kept it to myself. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I felt uneasy in my own house, like the walls were closing in. I glanced at the note again, and this time I realized something that made my stomach turn. The handwriting was so familiar, but I couldn't place it. It wasn't anyone I knew directly, but the careful loops and the way the letters were formed made it feel like someone who had watched me for a while, someone who had been paying attention to small details. I couldn't stop staring at it. "I like your hair this way." I repeated the words to myself, trying to understand why they had been written, why someone would leave them. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was missing something crucial. It wasn't just the message. It was the timing, the way it was left with no other explanation, no context. Just a statement. A sudden knock at the door made me jump out of my skin. I hesitated, then moved slowly toward the door. My heart thudded in my chest as I peeked through the peephole again, my pulse racing. There was no one there. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle and opened it just a crack. There, at the edge of my porch, was another note. This one was slightly different. It didn't mention my hair. Instead, it simply read, "You're being watched." My stomach dropped, and I slammed the door shut, locking it with shaking hands. My mind screamed that this wasn't a coincidence anymore. This was deliberate. Someone was watching me, and they weren't going to stop. Story 27. I had just pulled into the parking lot of the 24-hour ATM, the only one in town that was still open this late at night. The neon lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow across the empty lot. I wasn't expecting anyone to be out here at this hour, but I needed to withdraw some cash for a small emergency. The air felt colder than usual, the silence thick and pressing, but I pushed aside any unease. I approached the machine, typing in my PIN as my eyes scanned the empty lot around me. I was halfway through my transaction when I noticed him standing just behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence, but not so close that I could make out his features clearly. There was no line, and yet this man seemed to be waiting for something. I glanced over my shoulder, trying not to make it obvious, but he wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed somewhere else, distant, like he was lost in thought. My skin prickled. I didn't know why, but something about his stillness unsettled me. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat and worn jeans. His face was partially obscured by the hood of his jacket, but I could tell his eyes were fixed on the ground. I quickly turned back to the ATM, trying to ignore the growing tension in the air. I hurried to finish my transaction, but every second felt like it stretched longer than it should. I glanced over my shoulder again. The man hadn't moved. I tried not to stare, but my mind was racing. Why wasn't he doing anything? Why was he just standing there so close to me when there was no reason for him to be? I felt a wave of unease wash over me, but I told myself to stay calm. It was late. I was tired. Maybe I was just overthinking it. I withdrew the cash, and as I reached to grab it from the machine, I heard a soft noise behind me, a shuffle of feet on the pavement. I stiffened, my eyes quickly darting to the side. The man hadn't moved closer, but he had taken one small step in my direction. It was almost imperceptible, but I noticed it immediately. He was still staring at the ground, but something about his posture had shifted. I pressed the button to end my transaction and started to gather my things, trying to move quickly without drawing attention. As I was about to turn away, I caught his reflection in the screen of the ATM. He wasn't staring at the ground anymore. His eyes were now fixed on me through the reflection, unblinking. My breath caught in my throat. There was no mistaking it. He was watching me. I told myself to stay calm, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I quickly turned around to face him fully, hoping that if I acknowledged him, maybe he'd move on. But when I looked, the man hadn't changed his stance. He still stood there, motionless, like a shadow. A chill ran through me as I stood there, unsure of what to do. Should I ask if he needed something? Should I leave and get in my car as fast as possible? I didn't want to be rude, but something about him made me feel like I was in danger. My instincts were telling me to leave, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, like I was stuck in some strange limbo. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low and raspy. "Are you going to be long?" The words sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't a question you'd expect at an ATM at this hour. It was more like an observation, one that felt oddly personal. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and without waiting for an answer, I stepped back toward my car. I wasn't sure if I was just imagining things or if my body was simply reacting to the tension in the air, but I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me as I glanced over my shoulder. The man was still standing there, unmoving, watching me. I quickly got in my car, locking the doors behind me with shaking hands. The engine hummed to life, and I glanced back at the ATM, half expecting to see the man standing in the same spot. But the parking lot was empty. I looked around nervously, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was being watched, but I didn't see anyone. I drove off, my mind racing. I told myself it was nothing, that I had overreacted. The man probably just wanted to use the ATM after me, and I had let my imagination get the best of me. It was just the odd feeling of being out at night, in an empty parking lot, that made everything seem more sinister than it was. But as I turned the corner and looked into the rearview mirror, I froze. The man was standing there, at the corner of the parking lot, watching me drive away. He wasn't moving, just standing still in the same position, his eyes fixed on my car as I sped past. I swerved, trying to shake off the image, but his eyes stayed in my mind, unblinking and unwavering. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that I had seen someone out of the corner of my eye, and imagined it was the same man. But even as I turned onto the main road, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, following me, watching me from the shadows. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the encounter. I couldn't explain it, but something about that man felt wrong. His stillness, his quiet presence, the way he had just been there when there was no one else, everything about it felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something was wrong. The whole drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see him there. But there was nothing. The road behind me remained empty, the headlights of my car the only thing illuminating the darkness. I pulled into my driveway, relieved that I had made it home without any further incidents. As I turned off the car and started walking toward my front door, I glanced back one last time. My heart skipped a beat. Standing at the edge of the driveway, just beyond the reach of the streetlight, was the man. Story 28. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when it rang. The screen lit up, and to my surprise, the caller ID showed my own phone number. I stared at it for a moment, confused. I didn't recall calling myself, and I certainly wasn't expecting anyone else to use my number. Hesitant, I swiped to answer. The moment I placed the phone to my ear, I was met with a deep silence. The kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. No words, no sounds of any kind, just a steady, rhythmic breathing on the other end of the line. I paused, waiting for someone to speak, but nothing came. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, the silence suffocating. "Hello?" I said into the phone, my voice shaky. I could hear my own words bounce back in the stillness, but there was no response. Just breathing. Slow, deliberate, almost methodical. I couldn't figure out where it was coming from, but it felt like it was coming from right next to me. I pulled the phone away for a moment, checking the screen again. My number was still displayed. I had to be imagining things. Maybe it was a glitch, some kind of strange bug in the system. But then, the breathing continued, steady and deep, like someone was waiting for me to speak. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice becoming more desperate. Still, there was no answer, just that heavy breathing. I felt a wave of unease wash over me, the kind that tightens your chest and makes you second-guess every decision you've ever made. I was about to hang up, to end this bizarre and unsettling moment, when the breathing changed. It became faster, more frantic, like someone was struggling to catch their breath. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't just a prank or a misdialed number. Something was off, something was wrong. With trembling hands, I disconnected the call. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there for a moment, my phone still in my hand, trying to rationalize what had just happened. There was no way that was real. But the sound of that heavy breathing, so close and yet so distant, lingered in my ears. I stared at my phone, debating whether I should call someone. Anyone. My heart was racing, and the thought of calling the police felt ridiculous. What could I say? Someone called me from my own phone number, and all they did was breathe. It sounded insane. I was probably just imagining it. But before I could make a decision, my phone rang again. Same number. My number. This time I let it ring. I watched the screen flicker, my heart thudding in my chest as it continued to call. I was frozen, unable to move. Part of me wanted to pick it up, to demand answers. The other part of me, the smarter part, screamed at me to leave it alone, to not give whatever this was a chance to get any closer. The ringing stopped after a few seconds, but the silence that followed felt just as ominous. My phone buzzed a moment later with a new message. The screen displayed nothing but a string of random letters and numbers, like a corrupted file, garbled and nonsensical. I stared at it for a moment, my mind racing, but before I could make sense of it, the phone rang again. My number again. By now, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I had to answer. I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't let it continue, not knowing who or what was behind it. I pressed the green button, bringing the phone back to my ear. The breathing was there again. It was louder now, almost suffocating. My breath hitched in my chest as I listened, unable to speak. And then, through the static and the steady inhalations, I heard something else. A whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Look outside." I froze, the words freezing me in place. The breath in my ear suddenly became sharp, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I hadn't heard anyone outside, but the warning felt real, like it was meant for me, specifically. I held my phone away from my ear, trying to steady my breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I wasn't going to look outside. I wasn't going to be pulled into whatever this was. I was being irrational, I knew that. It was just a prank, right? But the whisper lingered in my mind. "Look outside." It was impossible to ignore. I stood up from the couch, my legs shaky, and walked toward the window. Slowly, I pulled back the curtains, peering out into the darkened street. At first, I didn't see anything. The streetlights cast a dull yellow glow on the pavement, and the houses across the way were dark. Then, my eyes caught movement in the shadows. Someone was standing at the edge of my yard, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. They were cloaked in darkness, standing perfectly still, watching. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel their eyes on me. My heart pounded in my chest, and a wave of nausea swept over me. I yanked the curtains closed, my breath coming in quick gasps. What was happening? Why was someone outside my house? Had they been watching me all along? I stumbled back from the window, feeling my phone slip from my hand. I hadn't realized it, but the call was still connected, the breathing continuing on the other end. My hands went to my ears, pressing against them as though I could shut out the sound. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who was on the other side of the line or why they were tormenting me like this. I didn't know why they had my number or why they had warned me to look outside. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be alone tonight. Story 29. The sun was setting behind me, casting a warm orange glow across the empty stretch of highway. The road was long and straight, with only the occasional turn to break the monotony. I had been driving for hours, the hum of the engine and the sound of the tires on the asphalt providing a steady rhythm to the trip. The solitude of the road was comforting, but I had a feeling something was about to disrupt the peace. I glanced at my rearview mirror and saw the headlights of a car too close for comfort. It was a dark sedan, and it had been tailgating me for the past few miles. At first, I thought it was just another driver in a hurry, but as the minutes passed, the car stayed uncomfortably close, almost as if it was trying to force me to go faster. I tried to stay calm, but the pressure of the car's proximity was starting to get to me. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road ahead. I could feel my anxiety building. There was no way I could speed up. The road was already too fast for my liking. I decided to pull over and let the car pass, thinking that maybe the driver was just impatient. I slowed down, pulled to the side, and turned on my blinker. To my surprise, the car behind me slowed down as well. It didn't pass. It stopped right behind me, close enough that I could see the outline of the car's headlights in my side mirror. My heart skipped a beat. Why weren't they passing? This wasn't normal. I was starting to feel a knot form in my stomach. I checked the rearview mirror again, and the dark sedan was still there, not moving. I could see nothing but the shadow of the car's grille, as if the driver was waiting for something. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt the weight of the isolation around me. There was no one else on this stretch of road, and now I was stopped in the middle of nowhere with a car that wouldn't leave. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. I wasn't going to just sit here like a sitting duck. I put my car in drive and slowly started to pull away, expecting the other car to move out of the way. But it didn't. The sedan continued to follow me, keeping the same distance, like a predator stalking its prey. My heart raced as I pressed down on the gas pedal. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Why wouldn't this car pass me? Why was it following so closely? I glanced at the speedometer. There was no reason for them to be so close, and yet they were. I turned onto a smaller road, hoping to lose them, but the sedan followed me, matching my every turn. The next few miles were a blur of twists and turns as I tried to lose the car. Each time I looked in the rearview mirror, the sedan was there, just behind me, never making a move to overtake. My anxiety had turned into full-blown panic. My mind raced with thoughts of what might happen if I couldn't shake them off. What if they had bad intentions? What if they were following me for a reason? In a last-ditch effort, I turned off onto a dirt road, hoping the uneven surface would make it harder for the sedan to follow. The car didn't hesitate. It followed me, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin beams of menace. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, the sound of it pounding louder than the engine. I tried to force myself to think clearly, but all I could focus on was the eerie presence of the car behind me. I made another sharp turn, this time onto a road I knew would eventually lead back to the highway, hoping I could at least find a place with more people, maybe a gas station or a well-lit area. But the sedan was still there, following with unyielding persistence. It was like they were waiting for me to make a mistake, to take a wrong turn. Eventually, I saw headlights up ahead, a sign of a small intersection. I pushed forward, hoping to find a safe spot. But as I approached, I realized the car behind me was no longer just tailgating. It was getting closer, closing the gap. I felt a jolt of panic. I could hear my breath quicken. There was no way I could outrun her on this road. I swerved into the intersection, my tires screeching as I forced the car to the side, my mind racing. I glanced back once more, expecting to see the sedan right behind me, but this time it wasn't. It had stopped at the edge of the intersection, its headlights illuminating the dark road. I couldn't make sense of it. What was going on? Why hadn't they followed me into the intersection? I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the wheel tightly, trying to steady my breathing. I dared not move. My mind was racing, my body frozen in fear. I glanced back again, and this time, the sedan wasn't just stopped. It had turned around, its headlights now pointing back the way I had come. I didn't wait for another second. I floored the gas pedal, tearing down the road with everything I had left in me. The car didn't follow. I glanced back one last time, and the sedan was nowhere to be seen. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. My heart was still pounding in my chest, but I felt the relief of knowing I was no longer being pursued. When I finally reached a small town, I pulled into the first gas station I saw and parked. I sat there for a while, trying to calm my racing heart, unable to fully understand what had just happened. Had it been a coincidence? Or had someone been intentionally following me? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than just a random encounter. Something about that night didn't feel right, and as I continued my journey, I couldn't help but wonder, had I truly escaped, or was I just being watched from a distance? Story 30. It was a quiet evening when I decided to take my dog for a walk. The air was crisp, with the faint scent of autumn leaves in the breeze, and the streets were empty, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. My dog, Max, a large German shepherd, trotted happily beside me, his leash gently pulling at my hand. The neighborhood was familiar, a place I'd lived in for years, and it always gave me a sense of comfort, especially at night when the world seemed to slow down. We rounded the corner, making our way down a street I'd walked countless times before. The night was calm, almost serene, with no cars passing by and the sounds of distant laughter from houses nearby. As we neared an alley, Max suddenly stopped in his tracks, his body going rigid. His ears perked up, and his tail, usually relaxed, was now stiff. I looked down at him, confused, before following his gaze toward the alley that cut through the row of houses. At first, I didn't see anything. The alley was narrow and poorly lit, the shadows from the buildings stretching long across the pavement. But Max's low growl broke the silence, his eyes never leaving the alley's entrance. I felt a prickle of unease slide down my spine. It was as if he could sense something I couldn't. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart beginning to race. "What is it, boy?" I muttered under my breath, trying to reassure both him and myself. Then I saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the alley, barely visible in the dim light, but enough to make my blood run cold. The person was completely still, their body blending into the shadows like a part of the alley itself. My stomach churned, and I took an involuntary step back, my grip on Max's leash tightening. He was growling louder now, a deep, unsettling sound that made my chest tighten with anxiety. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I felt the weight of their presence pressing down on me. Max, usually friendly and easygoing, was never like this. He was protective, yes, but never so immediately on edge without reason. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. There was something off about this whole situation. I knew that alley, and there was never anyone there at this time of night. I tried to peer into the shadows, my eyes straining in the low light, but the figure remained as still as a statue, not moving an inch. I cleared my throat, trying to shake off the growing feeling of dread. "Hey," I called out, my voice coming out shaky despite my attempt to sound confident. "Are you okay?" There was no response, no movement, not even a shift in the air. The stillness was unnerving, like the entire world had paused in anticipation. Max barked once, sharp and demanding, as if trying to make the figure respond. But the person didn't react. I felt my pulse quicken, and I took a step back, ready to turn around and leave. Something in my gut told me that this was not a situation I should entertain. But before I could take another step, the figure shifted ever so slightly. It was almost imperceptible at first, like a breeze moving through the trees. But I saw just a subtle twitch of the head, as if they were acknowledging my presence. My breath caught in my throat. That was it. That slight movement, that tiny shift felt like a warning. I could feel the tension in the air now, thick and suffocating. Max growled even louder, his body trembling slightly with the effort. I took a deep breath and tugged at his leash, trying to get him to move with me, but he was having none of it. He was rooted to the spot, his growl intensifying as he stared at the figure, his muscles tense and ready to spring. I glanced back at the figure in the alley, my eyes flicking nervously from the dark shadows to the faint outline of their silhouette. There was something about the way they stood that didn't feel human. The stillness, the lack of any sound or movement, it was as though they were waiting, or worse, watching, just waiting for me to make a wrong move. I felt like I was being drawn into something I couldn't understand, and the unease swelled in my chest. "Max, let's go," I whispered, pulling gently on the leash again. But this time Max tugged back, refusing to budge. His eyes remained fixed on the figure, his growl becoming a low rumble that seemed to echo down the alley. I felt my heart race, panic creeping in as I realized how vulnerable I was in this situation. I glanced around, but there was no one nearby to help, just the dark houses and the eerie silence of the street. Then, the figure moved. Slowly, deliberately, they took a single step forward. My breath caught in my throat as my instincts screamed at me to run. I didn't care if it was a person or something else. I just needed to get out of there. Max, finally sensing my urgency, yanked at the leash, his growls turning into barks as I tugged him backward. "Let's go," I muttered, panic rising in my voice. I turned and started walking briskly, pulling Max along with me. But as we passed the alley, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. The figure was still there, now taking slow, measured steps toward the mouth of the alley. They didn't hurry, didn't chase after us, but they were moving toward me. I quickened my pace, my legs feeling heavy with fear, as the figure's silhouette grew closer. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. My breath came in short, quick